The men who were in charge of the group of slaves gave orders every minute to keep the work going so that they could finish everything faster. Among the slaves was one of the boys who carried large logs, and on top of them was a green monster that was beating the boy because he was doing something wrong. As it turns out, this young man was the strongest man in the world, and he was able to achieve such a high title in just 27 years. He managed to hold this title for the next 2 years, and the last fight before his retirement, Choi was able to go without a single defeat that could have a bad impact on his future. But as soon as he finished his career, he was crossing the road after the fight late in the evening and got into an accident, after which he left this world without regaining consciousness. The guy was very upset because of this cause of his death, but even more upset was the fact that he had been saving for his retirement all his life, and now, in one moment, he had lost. Kneeling down, Choi put his head on the ground and began to wail that he had worked all his life in vain, and that now all his valuables would disappear. After spending 30 minutes in this position, the guy came to the conclusion that it was better for him because he finally did not need to fight with anyone. Then, raising his head, the young man began to look in front of him, thinking that it was good that he had no family or friends who could be upset about his death. Suddenly, at that moment, a blonde lady appeared in front of Choi, who smiled sweetly and first apologized for being a little late because she was supposed to be there a little earlier. After that, the young lady said that her name was Rachel, and she worked as a recruiter who searched for people whose lives had ended on Earth. The young man realized that his interlocutor was an angel, so he came closer and began to ask her to explain to him what he needed to do next. So the girl began to tell him that the guy had 2 options. First, he had to accept his death in order to be reborn as a miserable old bachelor. And in the second option, Choi can be resurrected as a hero in order to save this world that was waiting for a savior like this young man. The young man scratched his head and smiled and said that everything that happened to him was very unexpected, and these suggestions were also why he asked for some time to think. Rachel, in turn, continued to talk about how the guy really wants to lose such a good opportunity, and began to talk about the benefits of being resurrected by a hero. Choi was still not very convinced that this resurrection would entail many more battles from which he was already tired, and just left and did not want to return. Seeing the confusion on the face of the interlocutor, the girl took out a fake mustache and said that she would try to explain everything in detail again so that the young man would understand everything. And a minute later, she began to say that as soon as Choi became a hero in another world, the village headman would run to him barefoot with food and easy quests to complete. And after the quests are completed, the chief will pay attention to the young man and start talking about his daughter as the most beautiful girl in the whole village. And after his story, the man will offer that the young man take his daughter as his wife, and then he will be ready to leave his post for the next generation. After telling everything, Rachel saw that this did not affect Choi, so she decided to move on to Plan B and turned in the opposite direction and said that if he did not agree, she would just leave. And this really made the guy ask her to wait, and the young lady stopped and added that she had no guarantee that he would be reborn as a human in the next life. These words made the young man think for a few minutes, and then he came close to the lady and fell to his knees and said that he was ready to be resurrected. Rachel wanted to hear the answer again, so she pretended not to hear anything and apologized and asked him to repeat what he had said, but a little louder. Choi shouted in frustration that he was ready to be reborn and become a hero who would fulfill the task in order to marry a girl to create his own family. The young lady raised both hands in the air with a wide smile and said that in that case, they could proceed to resurrect the young man. And literally, in a second, a blue light began to form under the young man, and he could not believe that everything would happen so easily at that moment. Rachel was happily sending him to the other world, but Choi kept asking her to stop because, in his opinion, you can't send a person without any preparation. However, the girl certainly wasn't going to interrupt what she had started, so she simply wished him good adventures that would be very interesting. A few minutes later, Choi heard a voice through his sleep asking him to wake up and open his eyes, but he had to put a lot of effort into doing so. So, at first he thought that now he was being addressed by the village elder about whom the angel had told him, and it turns out that events are developing very quickly. However, things did not go as smoothly as they had from the very beginning, because someone grabbed him by his clothes and pushed him aside, threatening to gouge his eyes out if he did not open his eyes. Finally, Choi woke up and jumped to his feet, angrily saying that who was this crazy person who was treating him like this, and did he really want to die? And a second later, he saw a large, incomprehensible monster in front of him, saying that the guy could not just sleep in broad daylight in a slave dormitory. The young man assumed that this was the headman of the settlement who had the most beautiful daughter, so he sat down and decided to tell him that he was a hero who came to the rescue. The interlocutor could not believe it, so he approached the young man's face and said that he could not believe that heroes at this time were so stupid. And after that, Choi began to think about whether the angel had deceived him, but then decided to calm down, assuming that it was just a quest he had to complete. Therefore, without raising his head, he confirmed all his words that he had said before, namely, that he really is a hero who came to this world to help. After that, he quickly jumped to his feet and kicked the other man, telling him to die after calling him a monster from his studies. As soon as Choi was about to strike again, the creature caught him by the leg and reproached him for calling himself a hero and not even being able to hit the target. Then, the man said that he was tired of listening to all this nonsense because he was not the first person to appear in their village and say similar words. Waving his fist, the big monster angrily emphasized that the guy should understand everything after he had a good night's sleep and punched him right in the face. A few hours later, the young man woke up in the underground prison and immediately began to bang on the door to be let out and to be able to fight his opponent again. A green goblin entered the cell and, showing his real sword, told Choi that if he didn't shut up, he would be turned into soup. After these words, the guy decided to shut up and, sitting on the floor, began to think about the adventures that the angel told and where exactly everything went wrong. Sitting with his head down, the young man thought sadly that at this rate, he would not only not marry a beautiful girl, but would die a virgin for the second time. Suddenly, Choi heard a voice coming through the vent, and he said that he was the boy's elder and added that he would soon become a hero. After a short pause, the stranger, with a big smile on his face, added that they were now in the palace of the Demon King's army. The boy immediately began to ask why they were here and what was going on, and the man asked if the young man really wanted to know the whole truth. After receiving a positive answer, the young man said that in this prison there are many heroes like them who came to help in this settlement. The big gentleman that Choi had met earlier is the leader of this place, and his name is Reborn, and he also has a goblin guard who is very cruel, and his name is Jark. Then the interlocutor paused for a moment and said that the reason they all got here is an evil demon named Rachel, who convinces everyone of everything. After the story, the guy said something about this evil demon sending them to the wrong place, and it made Choi think about what was meant by these words. But he decided not to think about it himself, but loudly turned to his new friend and asked what he meant by the last phrase, namely when he spoke about the wrong place. And the young man said that he had heard from other heroes that their passage began either in cities or in settlements, and not in the middle of the army of the demon leader. Chung realized that now he was in a real hell, and the reason for all this was a blonde girl whom he took for an angel and agreed to all her conditions. A few days later, the new guy was brought to the rest of the heroes like him in order to put him to work because he had been sitting around for a long time without any use. Working all day on this construction site, the young man carried large logs so that later they could build walls for the future building. In an instant, it was announced that the working day was over, and Choi was happy because on the logs he was carrying there was a green goblin playing a musical instrument. After the end of the workday, Choi would return to his cell and lie down on the floor with his arms and legs stretched out and realized that it was much better to be in prison. Then he started to think back to the conversation with the lady named Rachel who sent him here and remembered that she had mentioned some privileges in her story. Then the guy put his hand forward in a serious tone and tried to call up the status window, and a blue window with information appeared in front of him. Looking at the numbers, he could not understand whether they corresponded to his status or what they could mean at all and how they affected his capabilities. Suddenly, through the vent, a new acquaintance of his approached Choi and asked him about the data he was looking at. And then, with a smile, he emphasized that the young man was really a little different from the rest because he, as a former champion, had already had more than 30 stats at the first level. The young man listened attentively, leaned against the wall, raised his index finger, and emphasized that he was still a slave. However, the interlocutor did not get upset. On the contrary, he tried to convey to the guy that he could really achieve more later and then escape from here. Choi didn't want to listen to anything because he had no idea how he could escape while on the first level, so he closed his ears and said goodnight to his friend. When he woke up a few hours later, he heard that his interlocutor had fallen asleep, so he decided to review all the data about himself once again alone. After sitting there for a few minutes, the guy noticed 2 points that gave him some hope that he could really change something and would not be here all the time. And these 2 points were mana, that gives supernatural power, and so far unknown hero points, about which no one in this prison knows anything. In a moment, Choi noticed a light that seemed very familiar to him, and a minute later he heard Rachel's voice addressing him, emphasizing that they had not seen each other for a long time. It turns out that the young lady has come to clarify some information for her latest ward because he has some potential. Of course, the young man was scared at first because of such a sudden appearance, but the girl immediately said that the hero's points are an important function that makes the hero's life easier. As soon as Rachel began to talk about how to get these points, Choi grabbed her with one hand and squeezed her, saying that he wanted to teach her a good lesson. A few minutes passed, and the girl was already apologizing for what had happened, while the guy used an ability that isolated their conversation from the others. After listening to the young lady's explanation, the guy said that it seems that she wants to become his personal manager as a sign of her punishment for everything she did. Rachel lowered her head and replied that she would be his personal fairy, and explained that she should be by his side, giving him tips until he defeated the Demon King. Choi apologized and said that he was no longer interested in anything to do with heroes, and then the young lady asked him to explain his words. The young man, lying down on his bed, said that he did not want to defeat the Demon King, and therefore decided to live an ordinary life in this place. The interlocutor emphasized that he had a high potential to fulfill this task, but even this did not convince him to act. Rachel had no intention of stopping and wanted to say some more words, but she couldn't because Choi interrupted her, emphasizing that he didn't want to fight like in his past life. The girl fell silent and began to think that this young man was always like this because he knew nothing but constant fights and the attention of women who went to fight. Then she began to replay in her mind the memory of the moment when she was told that she would be Choi's personal fairy until he defeated the Demon King. Rachel did not want to be given such responsibilities, so she fell to her knees and begged not to do this to her. But the person who gave the orders said that her decision would not change. Therefore, in a minute, she was already being moved to the place where her subordinate was, but at the same time, she tried to show that she did not like it until the last moment. While she was thinking about all this, Choi had not yet fallen asleep and turned to the girl and said that she, as his personal fairy, could help him with his escape plan. A few hours later, the door to the cell opened abruptly, and the demon's chief assistant, who came with his guards, entered. The guy immediately began to wonder why he had come here, because the roll call had long since ended, and as it turned out, Sir Redron was calling him for a conversation. Arriving at the leader's office, the young man heard that the goblin Jark told the leader that he had been working very hard and concentrated during the day. After a short pause, the giant added that at first, it seemed to him that Choi was another crazy person, but as it turned out, he was a pretty good worker. Therefore, the creature then got to his feet and came close to the young man, looked him in the eye, and offered to become the leader of all his slaves. Without waiting for an answer, the leader began to explain that he was offering this position because the speed of work had recently begun to drop and needed to be raised somehow. The fairy, who was nearby at the time, using the magic of invisibility, tried to explain to her ward that he did not need to agree to this offer. She was doing it too loudly, and the leader and his assistant Jark heard a strange sound and began to figure out what it could be. At this time, Choi bowed low and thanked him for the offer and agreed to it, promising that he would make these people work more efficiently. The interlocutor was pleased with this decision and said that if the young man worked well, he would write him a special letter of acceptance into the army of the Demon King. The next morning, the boy was already in charge of a group of people working on a construction site, constantly giving orders so that there was no time to rest. At some point, the system issued a notification that his charisma had increased slightly due to the fact that he had been leading a large number of people for some time. So with joy, he spread his arms to the sides and shouted that being the main slave was just perfect, at which time his subordinates began to think that he had simply gone crazy. The fairy did not understand why the guy started to behave like this and wanted to stop him a little, but he did not pay attention to her and asked her not to interfere. Then, he continued to treat the slaves with disdain, and the system reported that Redron's confidence in him had grown, so he was a few steps away from achieving his goal. After receiving this notification, Choi turned to the main tower, put his hand to his head, and thanked the leader for trusting him so much. Rachel tried to remind him at every opportunity that he preferred many adventures, and he told her that he decided to follow what the system said. The girl could not believe that the system could give out such tasks, and the guy still stood by his offer to read what he had recently read. And literally in a minute he started to say that it all started because of some fool he got to this place, and the young lady said that the system cannot use foul language, so she did not believe it. That's why Choi did not say anything further, but reiterated that he had started to read out the truth, and if she did not want to hear it, he would go about his business. So that night, the personal fairy could not stand it. I simply pulled the blanket off my subordinate in anger to find out why he agreed so quickly. The girl was careless enough to call him crazy, and because of this, the guy grabbed her again with one hand and said that he was not crazy and reproached him for being in this position because of her. And right at that moment, a message from the system appears with the title of the task for the hero, which describes what he has to do first. So he has to gain the respect and trust of Redron, for which he will receive 100 points. And because of this, the next day the young man ordered the slaves to sing a song about this leader. Rachel still could not believe that this was really the boy's quest, and could not understand which of the higher-ups allowed themselves to change everything for this boy. Suddenly, in the middle of the day, Jark approached Choi and told him that Raedrun was waiting for him to talk to him. As soon as the young man entered the office, the man told him that he had heard rumors that work had accelerated under his leadership. The young man knew that he had really put a lot of effort into it, but in order to show off, he began to say that without a leader like Raedrun, nothing would have happened. The main creature thought about these words, but the system informed the boy that he had completed his first task and therefore received 100 points. Choi and his personal assistant Rachel were a little surprised, especially the girl, who was shocked that the young man had managed to complete everything. The boy did not want to waste time because he realized that he needed to move on to the next part of the task. So he asked the leader if he could move on to training the slave. The giant, sitting at his desk, did not really understand what was meant by these words, so he asked him to explain in more detail. And the young man began to tell him in an interesting way that the master would have a group of elite working slaves who would move at the same time, and they would do the work for 3 without too much fatigue. And after a short pause, Choi added that with such slaves, the construction of the tower could be completed in just a week. The interlocutor did not believe that this was possible at all, because he himself realized that people are too weak to work and then train. But the young man did not intend to abandon his idea, so he said that the head of Raedrun would praise him for being able to organize the work at the highest level. And after that, the leader agreed, and Choi returned to his cell to hear his fairy crying, because he was starting to do some rash thing. The young man was quite angry because she was not letting him relax and rest properly with her crying, so he emphasized that she was very noisy. Then he decided to tell her that he had a plan to calm her down, but she did not believe him and said that he wanted to make a fool of her. The boy did not react to these accusations, but instead told her about his plan and how he wanted to use slaves to create a rebellion. Seeing the interest, the young man said that there were 3,000 human slaves in this prison, but only 500 enemies, and there was an alliance of people nearby. Therefore, Choi decided to create some panic in this place in order to try to ask for shelter from the human alliance and finally escape from here. Rachel was happy that her ward was smart and supported him, but he decided that he would need to check upstairs for the task. After that, the young man called up a system window to go to the hero's store and choose a useful item for himself, maybe even more than one. While everything was loading, the young man rejoiced at the fact that he had finally received this long-awaited hero status with which he could feel more comfortable. And as soon as the store's lots were displayed, they were quite primitive, and this first surprised Choi and then upset him, because he realized that there were abilities offered here that the hero did not need at all, and the fairy flew away to a certain distance and emphasized that this was still a first-level store. And a minute later, she added that if the guy tries to collect more points and raise his level, he might find something useful in this store. This made the other man very angry, so he rushed towards the young lady to grab her again and teach her a lesson for such statements. The next morning, Choi came to work in a bad mood, but he still had to do what was required of him, and so he first lined up his work group. And then he said that now the slaves would sing the 3rd Army Corps song, which was dedicated to their leader for being so smart and skillful. As soon as they started singing in unison, the leader, Mr. Raedrun, went to the window and folded his arms across his chest and rejoiced at the fact that he had allowed the boy to teach his slaves. At this time, his assistant Yark entered the leader's office and said in a serious tone that he had a message that he needed to hear right away. The interlocutor gave permission for the guard to speak, and he changed his tone of voice and quietly said that an army of people was approaching them. As soon as Raedrun's attention was drawn, the subordinate added that the 8th Division that opposed this army had already fallen into the paste and was therefore forced to retreat. The leader began to quickly analyze all the information and found it hard to believe that they would have to surrender the palace and tower just as they were almost ready. The assistant was getting more and more worried by the minute and emphasized that the leader should immediately evacuate from here while there was still time. However, the giant was in no hurry to do so and turned to his interlocutor and said that since ancient times, it is believed that a great battle is a battle for military supplies. That is why Raedrun said that according to the first rule of war, he must not lose the competent officer in charge of the supplies. And in their village, this person was Choi. At this time, the guy continued to train his subordinates without suspecting anything wrong, although he did notice that the main gentleman was watching them now. But in a minute, everything changed so dramatically because a hostile group of people appeared in the courtyard who wanted to take over the place, and the young man was supposed to be the first to be attacked, but he was protected by the leader. Seeing what was happening before his eyes, Choi did not know what to do in this case, whether to try to escape to the human alliance or stay here. But in a few minutes it was over, and those who came to these lands began to look at everyone who was already here to see who their rivals were. One of the human warriors approached the slave and asked him a question to understand whether they were warriors, and he gave him an affirmative answer. After receiving this answer, the young man said that they should move a little further away because they treat warriors and ordinary prisoners differently. As soon as they walked a few meters, they saw a man who first thanked the soldiers for coming to him. Then he folded his arms across his chest and said that he was very pleased to meet new people, and then introduced himself by saying his name, Olaven. When the man finished the last sentence, a subordinate appeared behind him and put his hand to his head and said that the evacuation of citizens was over. Olaven emphasized that it was a good job, and then the subordinate came closer and added that they had brought everyone who called themselves soldiers here. And then this main gentleman with a smile on his face said that they could start their work, and so ordered his men to take their positions. The slaves, being surrounded, were ordered to kill all the opponents in front of them without using weapons. At this time, Choi was riding in a carriage, and with his head down, he said goodbye to the rest of the world with his plan and the fact that his life would not change again. Looking up at Reborn, the boy was upset that no one would pursue them anymore because this giant had beheaded everyone who tried to do so. At this time, Rachel, who was nearby, tried to convince her subordinate that he should not be so upset because it could be used for good later. And at that very moment, the leader, who had been sleeping peacefully most of the way, woke up. But when he heard some whispering, he woke up and asked Choi if he had said anything. With a smile on his face, the young man replied that he hadn't said anything. But now he said that he was very glad that he had gone on the trip with the leader himself. The interlocutor was happy to hear this and said so out loud, and then said that they had almost reached the headquarters apartment of the third building. And after a short pause, the giant added that as soon as they arrived, he would personally enlist the young man in the army of the Demon King so that they would be together all the time. Choi had to show his joy, although inside he was very upset that things were happening this way. It was close to midnight when their carriage arrived at their destination, and so they had to wait a bit for the gate to be opened at such a late hour of the day. As soon as Reborn got out of the carriage, he said that the boy had followed him because he wanted to take him to the commander to introduce him. Before going to the important man, the leader emphasized that it was a great honor that Choi would meet him personally, so he should behave properly. And after a short pause, the interlocutor added that he had to do so if he did not want to die that evening without having lived a normal life. The young man said that he would behave as required, and only after that he and the leader went to the door of the room where they would meet with the commander. Hearing a woman's voice behind the door that allowed them to enter, Choi wondered if the woman could be the demon commander or if he was just imagining things. As soon as they entered the room, the boy's guesses were confirmed when they were greeted by a young lady who gracefully swung her leg to sit down. Then she smilingly greeted Reborn, with whom they had not seen each other for a long time, although there was a time when they often met. After that, they exchanged compliments, and the young man stood shocked that the commander was really a beautiful, sophisticated young lady. Then the giant took a few steps forward and said that he was very sorry that he could not hold the fortress, although he tried very hard to do so. The lady laid back in her chair and threw her head up and replied that it was not Reborn's fault because it was all because of the commander of the 8th Division. A minute later, Hemis smiled sarcastically and said that they should make a bag out of the commander's skin, and Choi forgot how to breathe for a minute. After finishing her conversation, the woman noticed that she had a guest whom she did not know and asked her friend to introduce them. The leader said that this was the same Choi he had told her about earlier, and then the man added that he had brought him here to enlist in the official army of demons. After these words, Hemis came up to the boy and looked at him and said that he looked very nice, so she asked him if he would not let them down during the work. The young man replied that he would do his best, and then the two demons began to discuss that with such a body, he would not last long in the army. This is because he is an ordinary person, and therefore other soldiers can destroy him, but Reborn still insisted that the young man be accepted, and he would personally train him. The interlocutor did not agree to have her friend teach him, because he could not spend his time on an ordinary person when they had certain problems. Therefore, in a few minutes, Hemis changed her appearance from a girl to a monster and vice versa, and got a black cat for Choi to watch. Then the young lady said that the animal's name was Bobo, and he was a very sweet creature, at which point the boy could not really understand how he should behave. After thinking about it, he could see the shock on his face, because he had not yet moved away from the monster he saw appearing through the commander, and here was some unknown creature. The boy's silence made Hemis think, and so she immediately asked what kind of reaction it was, and a second later clarified that the young man did not like it. Choi put his hand to his head with a smile on his face and said that he was honored to take care of Bobo, so he liked everything. Hearing this answer, the girl threw her animal at the new helper and said that it needed to be fed because it was growing and needed it all the time. After that, the young man and the animal moved to the house where she lives, and while she was sleeping peacefully, a fairy appeared who was shocked by what happened, and the system notified him of a new task in which Choi needs to earn Bobo's trust and respect in order to receive a reward of 200 points. Looking at the ward who was sleeping, the boy could not believe that the task of earning the trust and respect of the commander's animal was a task for a hero. The next morning, a new green goblin came to visit the young man, who did not address him by name, but simply said the common word, man. The young man bowed low and looked at his new supervisor and assumed that he could be considered a tasty snack for the locals. Then, after the introduction, Choi asked where the other workers of the kitchen they had come to were, and the man replied that they had all died, so only 2 of them would be cooking. The guy did not pretend to be scared. Instead, he smiled sweetly and tried to find out if this was all he had to do, or if there was something else. The Green Goblin said that this was all the boy had to do for now, and if he understood everything, he could go. And before he could finish, something happened. An animal attacked the creature behind him and began to lick his head, and the goblin was very scared and hid behind Choi and said that he could eat him. While the ward was sitting silently in one place, the green creature continued to climb on the boy, frightened, saying that one of them would die today. The young man decided not to drag it out for a long time and pulled the observer away from him and threw him in the direction of the animal in order to save his life today. After that, they moved to a room where the animal began to run after the fairy, who was already quite tired of running away from him all this time. That's why she began to ask for rescue, but Choi asked her not to run away from him for so long because he would get hungry again. While Rachel was running away from the animal, the young man went to the store and bought a cyst roller with which he could earn a little favor from the ward. As soon as the creature saw an interesting thing in the guy's hands, it began to watch his hand closely in order to calculate the landing trajectory. After the animal's attention was distracted, the fairy was able to land and rest a bit, emphasizing that it would be great if this bone had been found earlier. Then Choi began to rejoice at the fact that he was able to figure out so quickly how he could gain the animal's favor without even trying hard. However, what happened next made him change his mind, because the ward bit off his collar, and the fairy suggested that 1 cyst would not be enough. Then the guy said that, in his opinion, this animal needed fresh meat, and the interlocutor clarified that the young man was going to take this monster outside. But the young man did not know what to do, so he began to panic a little, and because of this, no normal ideas came to his head, only fear increased. And all because he was worried about not being eaten, so the first thing that came to mind was to just let the creature walk, so he said it out loud. The ward was not expecting to hear this, so he quickly calmed down, and in a minute he was running toward the door to jump out into the street. However, a second later, he changed his direction, and the young man realized that the animal was looking for the kitchen, but even he had not yet found out where this room was. Suddenly, in the corridor, Choi saw a goblin and decided to ask him if he could show him in which direction the kitchen was located. However, the green creature could not answer because Bobo appeared next to him, and so the interlocutor was afraid that he might be eaten right there. The guy managed to call the animal away, after which he said that from today he was worried about it, so he needed to know where the kitchen was. The goblin quickly got to his feet and said that the room they needed was to their left, and as soon as he said that, he began to run quickly down the corridor. The young man looked after the interlocutor, at first could not understand this behavior, and then he found it funny that one of the members of the Great Army was such a coward. After finishing his fun, Choi turned to his personal fairy and said that they would be able to find fresh meat in the kitchen and feed his ward with it. The interlocutor asked in a serious tone whether the guy was going to constantly worry about this Bobo, and then the question arose what the girl meant by these words. But before the young lady could explain anything, he decided to speak up and say that he had one dream: to meet a blonde and marry her. And while he was saying this one phrase, Bobo disappeared from his sight, which made Choi worry that the animal might get hurt. Panicking, he just stood there and did nothing. But Rachel found the animal and showed it to her friend, who was very happy to find it. After Bobo returned to his supervisor, different voices could be heard in the corridors saying that Commander Regis was dead. However, no one saw who had done this to him, but the fairy standing next to Choi suggested that it could have been done by their creature, who had been gone for a few seconds. As soon as the girl finished her sentence, goblins appeared in front of them and started running at them in order to deal with them right then and there. The creatures thought that this man in the guise of a man had taken the life of their commander, so it was their duty to do the same to him and possibly even worse. For a moment, they were all trapped, so the green creatures decided that they would first tear the dog to pieces, then the man, and at the end they would divide everything among themselves. Choi gathered all his strength in his fist, holding his ward in his arms, opened his mouth wide and shouted so that everyone who ran after them would come to their senses. As soon as there was silence around him and everyone paid attention to him, he demonstrated Bobo and asked if the attackers knew who he was. One of the green goblins said that it was just a monster, and the guy exaggerated his emotions and showed his dissatisfaction with this answer. So he said that Bobo was the animal of Commander Hemis, and after that the attackers began to discuss it among themselves because they still could not believe it. Then the young man lowered the animal to the floor, saying that the interlocutors should be very ashamed of themselves for not recognizing this creature. After that, the young man raised his head with a sly smile and said to his ward that he could now turn on his monster mode. And then Bobo rushed into the crowd, and Choi said that a dog without a muzzle is very dangerous for others. As soon as the animal ate one of the goblins, the guy asked the others if there was anyone else who doubted who the animal really was. They unanimously replied that they had no doubts about anything else, and at that moment, the system announced that the young man had received points for conquering several demons. And at that very moment, an important figure appeared behind the young man and said in a woman's voice that she had finally seen why the street was so noisy. Coming closer, the lady smiled broadly and said that her newcomer had decided to do some very interesting things here. After this meeting, Choi and Hemis went to her office, where the woman said that the young man had used her name and Bobo's name to survive. For some reason, the boy realized that this could end badly for him now, so he knelt down and bowed his head and said that he had committed a great sin. The young lady was surprised by this gesture and these words, so she decided to emphasize that she did not ask him, but simply gave him a simple compliment. Then she lifted his face up and added that he was a human being and was smarter than those idiots who had been in these places for years. The young man just stood there, silently listening to all these words, and when he had the opportunity to say something, the first thing he did was just thank her for the compliment. After that, Hemis placed him in her chair and said that the demon army usually tries to solve everything with force, and this leads to many problems. Choi, sitting in the chair opposite, could not understand what kind of problems she was talking about, and the girl said that soon he would understand everything without explanation. So she changed the subject a bit and asked him, smiling sweetly, if he had ever thought about becoming a manager, and then made a small pause. Hearing this question, the young man was quite frightened because he was not ready for such responsibilities, and the lady added that she could not allow her name to be used all the time. Then Hemis began to tell him that in the army of demons there is a decisive duel in which one is allowed to take the title of their opponent, if they lose, of course. After that, the girl said that she would defend him for only a month, and after that he had to defeat the opponent she personally chose for him. And in a second, she emphasized that each of his victories would extend his protection for exactly 1 month, and then he would have to participate in a duel again. After listening carefully, Chen asked what would happen if he just lost, and this would happen during the first battle. The interlocutor smiled mysteriously and said that then he could not expect a pardon from her, and most of all, he would regret not dying during the battle. Leaving the office, the guy was in no mood to do anything because he had agreed to all the conditions because he simply had no other choice. Of course, the first few minutes he was in despair, but then he decided to turn to Rachel to find out what she had said about his potential. The girl was very surprised that so much time had passed and he still hadn't figured it out, so she explained that potential is an opportunity and not some kind of power. The young man did not like the way the young lady answered him, so he reproached her for calling herself a personal fairy and not even trying to help. During the conversation, Chan just got to the kitchen, and opening the door a little, he first looked around the room and then turned to try to find someone. A minute later, he heard a voice saying that it must be the person the commander had told him about and invited him to come inside. As soon as the guy entered, the big red creature told him that he was the chef, a cook named Kulkan, and immediately asked why the guest had come here. The guy, scratching his head, still standing near the door, said that he wanted to know if he could get something for Bobo to eat, and the other man was not even surprised to see the animal's face change again. After a short pause, Kulkan said in a serious tone that he would not give food to Choi, and this of course made the guy think about why everything was so. But the creature itself decided to explain and justified it by saying that it was not going to help the man, because the only order that came from the commander was not to raise a hand to the newcomer. This did not stop the young man anyway, so he tried to find out if there was any way he could still get food, because he was not asking for himself, but for Bobo. The man folded his arms across his chest, and at first made a sound like he was thinking, but after a few minutes he said words that were not very comforting, but gave him a chance. He said that if Choi needed meat, he could hunt for it just like all the demons who were about to have a fancy dinner. Looking at the other kitchen workers, he couldn't believe that they were all cooks, because their actions looked more like butchers. Then he turned his gaze back to his interlocutor, and looking at him, he wondered what it would be like to hunt alone, and how it should be done, and most importantly, where exactly. However, he didn't have to think about it for long, because in just a few hours he found himself on a real boar hunt with demons. Standing next to a large animal, The guy still could not believe what was happening, because in a moment, the creature was able to take the life of one of the demons. The others saw this and started shouting that they would definitely take revenge for it, but the young man did not know who exactly could become a tasty snack for his ward. At this time, a fairy in the form of a butterfly suggested that he just run away from here, but Choi did not even consider this option, because he would not be able to escape from such a crowd. That's why he realized that he was in danger and it needed to be fixed immediately, and because of this, he turned to the demons, saying that he would be the next to strike. However, the head of the kitchen said in a serious tone that there was no longer any need for this, because the hunt had already ended a few minutes ago. And the guy was shocked that it was over so quickly, although he was most interested in how these creatures managed to destroy such a large boar. After that, one of the goblin's subordinates came to the boss to give a report on the hunt and said that 12 demons had been killed and many more were wounded. Although Choi's opinion was that the losses were great, the chief did not react to this, but said that they would prepare for the next hunt after a little rest. And while everyone was resting, the young man turned to Rachel and scratched his head and said that running away was not the best option for him now. The girl immediately assumed that the young man was going to hunt with a group of demons, but the man did not confirm these words because he did not understand why he would do it. Instead, the young man said that he had been thinking for a long time and realized that stats increase only when you level up, which means that he needs to gain experience. The interlocutor began to clarify how exactly he was going to gain experience, and Choi quickly replied that he could get a certain number by striking only one last time. Rachel tried to say something in surprise, but was unable to form a coherent sentence that would make sense and be understood at all. So the guy turned sharply in the opposite direction and thanked her for her very informative answer and said that they could now go on their way. While the young man was walking, he was thinking that he still had no other option because he had to become stronger within a month if the commander was serious. After that, he approached the leader of the hunt and smiled at him, and he said that he had already started to think that the man had just run away. Laughing loudly, Choi said out loud that he would never do that, and the thought flashed through his mind how this creature managed to guess what he was thinking. Then the boy said that he thought about it a bit and decided that he wanted to join the next hunt as part of the army of brave demons who would gather together. At first, the red giant smiled mysteriously and said nothing, so it made the young man wonder if he had crossed the line. But a minute later, the interlocutor folded his arms across his chest and threw his head back and began to laugh even louder, saying that he was really starting to like the man. After these words, Choi realized that there was no reason to worry yet, so he scratched his head and smiled to himself, saying that it was all thanks to the chef. Suddenly, the interlocutor stopped talking and said in a serious tone that he had decided that the guy would be in charge during the next hunt. And in a minute, he began to explain that for leaders, this is the most important position, and usually newcomers are not allowed to do this, but today is a special case, so he decided so. The young man was frightened by this decision, so he began to say that he would not be able to control other demons and that the cooks would complain if he became a leader. The giant listened attentively to his interlocutor, but their conversation was interrupted by one of the goblins, who began to speak loudly to the chef to tell him something important. So the boss immediately began to ask questions to find out what happened, and the subordinate continued to run and shouted that there was an invasion of monsters. After the speaker stopped, a loud, wild cry was heard in the forest. The chef heard it out loud and said that it was a herd of Urons that came to them. Choi raised his head up to hear better and did not like the sound, so he asked if they were in any danger. The chief said that they were not in danger, but there was something that upset him because the meat of these monsters was not tasty, but despite this, they would still hunt them. The young man began to like this, and with a big smile began to think that he needed to stay closer to make the last blow. At this point, Rachel decided that she should help him a little bit and directed some energy to her subordinate. And because of this, his energy and strength increased. All this would last only 3 minutes, but at least it was something, so she wiped her head and exhaled, saying that Choi might not even thank her for it. At first, the guy lightly hit her, reproaching her for not doing it before, but then he rushed to the battlefield to deliver the final blow. So while he was running, he was thinking about how best to make sure that everything ended exactly as he wanted it to, because he might not have another chance. As soon as the young man was able to get closer to the creature, he took its life with just one blow, and the system immediately reported an increase in level. After quickly reading the information that was displayed, the young man saw that in just one blow, he was able to rise to 4 levels, and this is a very good result. And because of this, Choi had a hope that today, he could easily go up 20 levels and finally become a little stronger. So, after these thoughts, he rushed into the crowd to deal with most of the animals that were now surrounded by a group of demons who were also destroying them. The young man was so carried away by the fact that the last blow brings him so much benefit that he no longer saw anything in front of him except potential targets. After everything was over, Fairy Rachel approached her subordinate and tiredly asked if the hunt was over or if something else would happen. The young man, looking away, replied that they had already destroyed all the monsters, and that the demons had already divided the meat during this short period of their rest. And all this became clear from the way the green creatures stood next to each other, holding pieces of meat in their hands and chewing it quietly without any preparation. Suddenly, behind him, Choi felt a breath, then a hand on his shoulder, and the voice of the chef asking why he was standing there doing nothing. The young man excitedly began to clarify whether it was even possible to eat army food in this way, and the interlocutor explained that the meat spoiled very quickly. Looking for a piece of meat, the red creature said that he lives for the sake of delicious meat, and when they return to the palace with it, it is not known when it will be their turn to receive it. And then the young man began to think that these subordinates are not really given what they need for existence, because they are just ready to die for the sake of delicious food. After that, the chef handed Choi a piece of large meat and said that he could eat it too, because he had fought with them like a real warrior. At first, the boy did not understand how he could even take a bite of raw meat, but then he thought that every local chef would give his life for it. That's why he decided to take a bite and chewed it, and realized that the meat itself was not bad, but it had no taste and it took a long time to chew. Then the young man turned his attention to the demons who were enjoying this food and was surprised that they were taking such great risks to eat normally. Because of this, Choi decided that he would offer to cook a dish that his current partners might like so that they could eat a decent meal. As soon as everyone paid attention to him, he repeated his offer, thinking that he might be able to lead them when he earned their trust. Then the young man joyfully raised his hand in the air and called the hero's shop, but Rachel, who was nearby, could not understand what all the fuss was about. After all, the young man makes decisions so quickly, without even really thinking them through, and because of this, most of his actions seem useless to her and do not bring any benefit. And this time, he spent his 70 points to buy something, and the girl was waiting with horror on her face to see this purchase. And just a minute later, the young lady saw a small jar of salt in her interlocutor's hand and reproached him for wasting his points again. With a smile on his face, Choi said that Rachel didn't understand at all, because the new taste of meat might change something in the minds of these creatures, and they might be able to enjoy it. Having seasoned one piece of meat, the boy was very happy that he had succeeded, and began to think that he could become a god to the whole new world. Then he went up to the chef and handed him a piece of cooked meat and asked him to taste it in order to appreciate the taste. The other man listened attentively, then thanked him for his kindness, and finally said that he would try it next time because he was already full. Choi was a little angry at this answer, but he tried not to show it, and therefore emphasized that he had put his whole soul into this meat, which is why he wanted to get a comment on his effort. The red giant could not stand it, and agreed to taste just one piece in order to evaluate the taste and say how he liked this cooking. And as soon as the creature began to chew, the taste brought him back to the memories of his childhood, when he was still a child and his mother used to cook something similar to this meat. The memories of those times and his mother touched the chef, and because of this, tears appeared in his eyes that he simply could not hold back and did not even intend to do so. That's why Choi was able to get a whole bag of meat from this giant with a shelf life of 2 days when he returned home. With a happy smile, he began to walk to Bobo's house to feed him, and as soon as he got to the door, he first stuck his head in to see what was going on inside. As soon as he spoke to the animal, it quickly began to run towards him with its mouth wide open, because it felt that he had brought something tasty for it. And everything really happened exactly as Bobo had imagined, because the guy immediately took out 2 large pieces of meat to feed his subordinate. In a few hours, the guy threw the entire contents of the bag on the floor and said that the animal could eat as much as it wanted, because tomorrow he would bring a new portion. And after that, Bobo's affection for Choi grew, and the system informed him that this was enough to complete the task, and the young man received his 200 points. The boy was very happy to receive this news, because finally his case was moving forward, and he could get the next task to get points. Rachel, who saw the good results of her subordinate, was surprised that he managed to complete the next quest so quickly, because she did not even hope for it. Having accumulated a lot of points, the young man wanted to spend them in the hero shop, but the interlocutor asked why he did not use them for his characteristic. The young man did not even know that it was possible to do so, so he again reproached the fairy because she had missed the stage of training at the very beginning, where he had to learn everything. And then Rachel decided to quickly tell him everything, so she said that with the help of points, Choi can pump his 4 main characteristics, including strength, endurance, agility, and mana. The guy asked for an explanation about charisma, and the girl said that it was a hidden characteristic that could not be increased by points. It could only be enriched by training. Finally, the young lady added that the guy should try to keep a balance between all the characteristics, and he did not understand why if he could only invest in strength. Rachel was surprised by this statement because everyone knows perfectly well that it is better to fill your body with mana, which can then be used as magic rather than getting a regular pumped-up body. After that, the young man distributed the points across all the characteristics. And then the girl suggested finding an ability called Basic Magic Control in the hero shop. And while Chan was looking for the name he needed, the fairy explained that this ability would allow him to use basic magic and would cost about 100 hero points. After searching for a few minutes, the guy didn't find anything, and the woman was quite surprised by this fact because it was the most popular item in this store. 3 weeks have passed since that moment, and the guy managed to reach the 100th level, and lying on the floor, he said tiredly that he did not think it would take so long. Looking at all his points, characteristics, and achievements, the young man said with a slight smile that he was the only hero in this world who worked so hard for the result. After reviewing the next task, the fairy put her hands to her sides and happily said that it looked like the easiest he had ever done. Choi didn't like this statement and pushed his assistant to the floor and asked her if she knew how many times he had almost died trying to complete it today. Rachel, trying to save herself, said that there was no need to react so sharply because she knew from her own experience that the 100th level is reached only quietly in 6 months. After this small fight, a goblin knocked on the door, and entering the room, he addressed the young man and told him that the commander wanted to meet with him. As soon as the young man entered Hemis's office, the lady who greeted him in her chair first greeted him, and then emphasized that he had changed a bit. After looking him up and down, she said with a wide smile that she felt that his mana had grown considerably and that he was stronger. Choi put his hand to his head and explained that he had achieved all this only because he had a great desire to bring Bobo fresh meat every day. Hemis said that the boy had become stronger somehow very quickly and asked if it was because of the level system of heroes who were sent here. Hearing these words, the young man froze in the same position as he was because thoughts flashed through his mind about how she knew he was a hero and how long she had known this information. The girl saw the surprise on the face of the interlocutor and asked him not to do it so much and added that she knew about all this from their first meeting. And all because she has a friend who is obsessed with heroes. And then the young lady came closer and asked if Choi knew why she called him. The guy lifted his shoulders up and couldn't figure out what to say because a lot of different information was running through his head, but none of it answered the question. However, at the last moment, he remembered that at the first meeting they had agreed on a duel in which he had to take part and win for his further protection. Hemis asked if he remembered all the details of the agreement, and the young man smiled slightly and said that even if he wanted to forget, he could not do it. Hearing this answer, the girl abruptly changed her appearance into a monster and asked why the young man was so calm now, knowing the consequences. She then put her hand on his chest and emphasized that he had to work even harder so that he would not die in vain during the battle. After the meeting with the commander, Choi sat down on a wooden chair and began to think about what exactly captivates the audience when watching a battle. Closing his eyes, the boy first began to think that the captain should choose an opponent whom he simply could not defeat, and it would be done on purpose. The fairy, who was always nearby, asked what her subordinate would do, whether he really decided to die, but he asked to wait a little because he had not thought about everything yet. Then Choi began to click in the system, saying that the day before his fight, he needed to study the opponent in order to understand how strong he was. Rachel was worried about this decision because they only knew the name, and so she didn't even know how to get information about this creature. The guy continued to press the keys without looking up and said that there was an interesting item in the store called a force meter, which he had already purchased. Having received the glasses that were supposed to fulfill this function, the guy said that he would try to find out something about the opponent and then make a plan for his victory. The interlocutor said that his brain works only in one direction, and the young man replied that he was glad that he uses them at all, because some people don't even try. Putting on his glasses, Choi measured the fairy's strength, and the number 375 was displayed, and for comparison, they decided to measure it to see who had more. After handing the fairy his device, the boy waited for her to tell him, but she was silent for a long time, then tried to say something for a long time, and he could not stand it anymore. So he asked her what had happened, and the young lady looked out of her glasses and said that for some reason she thought they had already broken. And a second later, she added that it was simply impossible for him to be stronger than her, because his strength corresponds to the number 1,560, which is quite large. With her head down on the floor, Rachel said that last month she had 10,000, and now she doesn't feel good with that amount. The guy did not react at all to the words that the assistant said to him. Instead, he put his glasses back on because he decided to see how strong Bobo was. And it turned out that he was the strongest of the three of them, because he had 47,000. Rachel, as soon as she heard this, said that they both lose to the animal in terms of points. The young man did not react to these words. Instead, he decided to go for a walk down the street to test the strength of those he met on the way. Looking at the goblins, Choi assumed that they must be weak, and it turned out that most of them had the same level of strength as him. Passing by the commander, the boy saw that he had 14,000 strength and realized that all those who exceeded the mark of 10,000 had the rank of commander. After that, the young man turned to the fairy and asked her that his opponent seemed to be a commander as well, and the girl confirmed it, adding that he was an orc with a pig's head. After receiving this information, Choi began to think about how to increase his strength, and suddenly he saw a creature ahead of him that looked like his opponent. So he quickly looked at it through his glasses and saw the number 6,000, and this guy was simply paralyzed because it was a very strong enemy for him. At that very moment, the system issued a notification that the young man had a new task to complete, in which he needed to reach a strength score of 3,000. After reading all the conditions, the young man began to accept what was happening to him with a slight smile and said that it would be what it would be, either he would die or not. But Choi still had hope that he would try to survive, so the next morning he was almost late to the kitchen to get meat for his bobo. The chef immediately noticed the accessory on the boy's head and asked him where he got such a helmet, and he did not hesitate to answer that he wanted to take it after seeing the elders wearing them here. The interlocutor believed this and did not ask further because they were preparing to go hunting at that time, so his thoughts were occupied with this. While the chief was trying to tell something, the young man put on his glasses and could not believe the numbers he saw because they were too high for an ordinary cook. But the question arose not only with this creature, but also with the other goblin, because they had great performance. So Chen assumed that they were able to achieve this by constantly fighting monsters. Therefore, he decided to ask the chef to fight with one of the chefs in order to understand and feel the strength of his future opponent. He explained his request by saying that he wanted to learn something else to be more effective in the hunt, and the interlocutor said that the young man was very strong for a human. The boy realized that he would not be able to achieve this so easily, so he said that he would cook the meat himself and eat it, and it really worked. And the chief asked him who he wanted to fight. In a few minutes, Choi chose his opponent, and the rest of the goblins, watching what was happening in the room, could not understand why they were doing this before the hunt. After all, they love to taste the meat that the boy cooks, so they didn't want him to get hurt today, and therefore not go with them on the mission. There were even those who wanted to kill their colleague earlier, if only the guy would stay safe, but the chef heard about it and ordered his subordinates to shut up. Before the battle began, the chef himself approached the giant and said that he should not take this man's life and that he should fight with half his strength. The creature listened and replied that he understood everything, but everything would become clear only after the battle began, because everything could happen vice versa. As soon as the two opponents were opposite each other, the chef said with a wave of his hand that the battle could begin right now. At this time, the phrase was running through the creature's head that he should never take Choi's life. But the guy, on the contrary, was determined to experience everything for himself. Therefore, during their first encounter, the young man assumed that his opponent was striking only on his instincts, but that he needed to continue studying further. And at some point, the young man felt that he could defeat this giant, so he jumped high up the mountain and delivered a rather strong kick to the face. And it worked. Everyone began to shout that the man was able to knock out the goblin, so Choi began to think that he could really win the upcoming battle. All the way to the hunting grounds, he was thinking about how he was able to defeat a creature twice as strong as him with just one punch. He was overjoyed and decided that the strength scores were just some insignificant numbers, so he should gain some points and then he would definitely win. While he was standing there dreaming about all this, one of his subordinates approached the chef and told him that a group of thalasses had been spotted not far from them. However, as the conversation continued, Choi realized that something was wrong, so he asked about it and was told that the meat of these monsters is actually very tasty, and the bone marrow is a real delicacy. But the downside is that these thalasses live in groups and have an incredibly developed maternal instinct, so children should never be touched. After listening to everything, the guy asked that they would not hunt today, but the chef was in no hurry to agree to this because he wanted to eat this delicious meat. And so he raised his weapon aloud and addressed his subordinates, saying that now they were all going to attack to taste the meat of the thalasso. And after this order, everyone rushed to the monsters in order to get everything they wanted today, because it is not known when they will get to hunt like this again. Choi was also glad that this task was not cancelled today, because he could get a few more points by inflicting the last blows on the monsters. The system barely had time to give out notifications that the guy's level was rising because he was so enthusiastic about hunting that he didn't even count how many creatures he managed to destroy today. The fairy supported her subordinate in that he was quite skillful in taking the last blows in order to achieve his goal before the hunt. And while he was rejoicing in his success, all those present were alerted to the fact that the Queen of Thalassa, whom they had somehow woken up, was approaching. The guy immediately put on his glasses as soon as he heard about her arrival, because he wanted to understand how strong she was, because even orcs and goblins were afraid of her. The system issued a notification that the power of this creature was immeasurable, and it alarmed the young man because he did not understand how they could fight an unknown creature. Realizing that they were at a disadvantage, Choi turned his head back to ask the chef what his plan of action was. However, what he saw frightened him even more, because the chief chef and his subordinates simply turned around and began to run for their lives. The queen at this time raised her head high and opened her mouth wide and began to shout loudly to demonstrate her presence. The young man covered his ears and could not believe that a spider could scream like that. But then his attention was drawn to the fairy, who asked him to look back. And as soon as he saw a large group of Thalassas moving behind him, he realized that there was no point in being a hero now, so he picked up speed and started to run away. After running a few meters, Choi lost many goblins along the way and came to the conclusion that if he stopped for even a second, he would definitely die. After a few minutes of running, the young man stopped at the entrance to the cave and began to wonder aloud whether it was a safe place to hide. Rachel said that it was safe because she had checked everything, but the boy did not trust her very much, but still decided to hide in this place. Going deeper inside, Choi asked if this cave could be someone's lair because it was not like those created by nature. The fairy who was flying nearby replied that she did not know this information, so after looking around, she said that the Queen of Thalassa would definitely fit here. And as soon as the young lady said this guess, the boy noticed green mucus on the walls and then a web and looked into the distance and realized that this was the queen's nest. That's why he concluded that their situation was very bad, because if she came back here, it would be difficult for them to get out alive. And so the young man turned to the side where the exit was and said that they should get out of here immediately while they still had the opportunity. However, as soon as he said this, an adult Talus appeared next to them and began to move towards the uninvited guests in order to destroy them. While running away from this monster, Choi tripped over an object and began to fall to the ground while shouting his displeasure at what had happened. Sitting on the ground, he decided that he needed to find some weapons immediately. So he grabbed one of the eggs without looking and threw it at the attacker. At first, the queen moved back a little, but she did so because she saw that an egg had been thrown at her, and she wanted to catch it without damaging. At this time, the guy noticed that the attack on him stopped, and looking at his opponent, he noticed that she was distracted to catch what he threw at her. So he started to ask the fairy why the queen did that, and the girl suggested that this round sticky object could be very important for the monster. After that, Choi turned his gaze to the similar objects nearby and carefully examined them and said that they looked like large thalassa eggs to him. And this information allowed him to use these objects to distract his opponent and thus safely get to the exit of the cave. And so, he quickly got to his feet, took one egg in his hands, and shouted with a wave that the queen should not distract her attention, but catch her heirs. The female monster, of course, did everything to save all the objects flying in his direction, because they are really very important to him. At this time, Rachel, who was nearby, tried to analyze the situation in order to understand how best to proceed with her subordinate. At this time, the guy already felt like a winner, because he was able to move freely from place to place, thanks to the fact that he was throwing eggs at his opponent. In just a few minutes, most of the eggs were broken because the queen was so tired that she could not even raise her arm. Choi didn't even intend to stop, so he asked his fairy again to give him an item, but she told him that they were already out. And as soon as her rival heard about it, she began to move quickly towards the guests who had done her so much harm during her first visit. The queen was so upset that at first she decided to demonstrate this by screaming loudly, in which one could hear despair and despondency. However, this did not frighten the young man, because he realized that this woman was already very tired, so he should take this opportunity to use his devastating technique. And when he did so, the system began to give out notifications that his level had been increased, and this could only mean that he had destroyed this monster. So after relaxing a bit, Choi also felt tired and exhausted, and holding on to the stone, he told Rachel that they needed to get out of here immediately. But before he started moving, he asked her to use healing magic to heal his minor wounds and scratches. Then he decided that he was going to do the scattering of the points he had received, and after that he saw that all his characteristics were balanced, but he did not yet understand what the benefit of this was. While he was doing all this, he heard a familiar voice behind him, in the darkness calling his name, and so the guy began to scroll through his mind who it could be. It turns out that it was the chef, and as soon as he came into the light, he sat down next to the boy who asked him how he got here. The red giant, smiling broadly, said that when he was running away, he saw a cave on his way and went inside to escape. A second later, he emphasized that they were both very lucky to be here, but Choi decided to tell the truth and said that they were in the nest of the thalasses. Looking around, the chef picked up one egg and said with tears in his eyes that this was a very cool delicacy that all important people dreamed of tasting. That is why the giant could not believe that such a thing was in his hands, but he did not have to stay in his dreams for long because Choi emphasized that they had to run away. The other man broke the egg and began to eat it, saying that this was their last meal because they would not be able to escape from here, especially from the queen. A few minutes later, another group of green goblins came into the cave, and as soon as they saw their boss, they were very happy. At this time, the young man froze in place because of what the cook told him, and all because he did not want to believe that this could be his last day in this world. Gritting his teeth, he mentally said to himself that he did not agree to this, because he had not even tasted the 5-course meal that his wife would prepare. At this time, the commander came to Hemis's office to inform her whether he had completed the task she had set for him. Redrin gave a quick and clear answer that he had managed to capture the next holy empire in which he could create his own order. The woman, hearing this information, began to praise her interlocutor, saying that he was just a great warrior because he was able to deal with everything in just 3 weeks. When the young lady stroked the giant's head, he said that she was very kind to him because the task was not really that difficult. Suddenly, a goblin knocked on the door, and Hemis asked if he had something important to tell her or if it could wait a little longer. The creature, holding the door, said that it was an urgent report because the cook had gone to the forest to get ingredients and something had happened. The commander emphasized that something happens every day, so she wondered why the assistant was making such a fuss this time. And the interlocutor explained that during the hunt, the queen of the Thanasi appeared, and therefore it is not yet known whether the group died with the cook or are still alive. The young lady was upset to hear this news, but then asked what was known about the man named Choi, and the goblin said that he had also disappeared. At this time, everyone in the cave accepted the fact that they would soon die and took the opportunity to choose eggs to eat. Even the chef himself was beginning to give a farewell speech when Jong-il could not stand it and hit the head of the chef, telling him to finally pull himself together. Throwing his head back after the blow, the red giant did not understand what had happened at first and tried to understand by looking at the young man. Yi Choi really explained his actions by saying that in his opinion, some kind of spell was used on the goblins and orcs, and so he decided to destroy it with the help of his secret object. After that, the boy began to tell what he had read in a book about how to handle fire very carefully, because Thalassa's saliva and mucus catch fire quickly. Then the young man looked at the chef and asked if he knew how to use fire, and the man listened and said that he could only throw small fireballs. However, the giant then told the young man to just give up and not to look for a way out in vain, because the Thalassa's shell could not be destroyed by fire. Choi got to his feet and said in a serious tone that he was not going to burn anyone here, because he had a completely different idea. He then turned to the group of surviving chefs, and having attracted their attention, said that he had an idea how they could escape from here. While everyone was looking at the young man, he joyfully raised his hands and said that they all needed to survive in order to continue eating as much as they wanted. And then he promised that if they got out of here unharmed, he would provide them with plenty of demon meat that he had prepared himself. Everyone agreed because the offer was so tempting, so Choi spent a few minutes explaining his plan and finally asked them to follow him alone. But just in case, he reminded them of the main point that they all had to run quickly and not stop until they reached the exit of the cave. As soon as everyone answered that they understood, the guy started running first, and everyone who was with him in the cave started to follow. After running a few meters, the young man noticed a group of thalasses and informed his partners about it so that they could be careful in the first place. After that, the young man turned to the chef to prepare a fireball because he had to launch it at the same time as the egg that Choi would throw at the group. Having fulfilled his plan, the boy looked at the consequences and said to himself that he had hidden a few eggs in his pockets because the cave could be destroyed by fire. Then he turned to the goblins and orcs and shouted that they should all run as fast as possible before the group of monsters was distracted by the fire they had launched at them. As he continued to run, Choi continued to tell his friends that they had to keep running and never stop in order to escape. As soon as the guy realized that he had one egg left to repel the attack, the fairy told him that a light appeared ahead of them. That is why the boy again turned to the goblins and told them this information, and after that they all began to move quickly towards the light because they thought it was a way out. As they approached the light, Choi stopped and looked up, smiling happily, and said out loud that they had escaped from this trap. However, in just a second, his mood changed dramatically because he saw in front of him not a way of escape, but a giant thalassa queen. Seeing what had happened to her people and her nest, the monster could not realize at first that it was really true, so it took her a few minutes to realize. The chef approached the young man and said that now they would definitely be finished, but he was not so sure that although she saw them, she did not start attacking. So he assumed that she did not do this because she noticed an egg in his hands, and he waved it around and asked the red giant to give him fire. While his partner was preparing, Choi showed his rival the egg and emphasized that it was the last one, and if it exploded, everyone here would die and the cave would collapse. When she didn't respond, he started waving the fire and the object, telling her to leave immediately because he would do what he planned. The opponent continued to stand in her place, demonstrating everything she did not like, while the young man was still shouting for her to leave. Several minutes had passed since their meeting, but no one was going to give in, so no progress was made, and everyone remained in their places. During this time, the egg had already caught fire, and Choi had to throw it to the side where it hit the wall, and because of this, tremors similar to an earthquake occurred in the cave. The goblins felt this and began to panic because they realized that they could die here, and the young man who guessed that the cave was beginning to collapse understood this perfect. Therefore, he headed towards the exit and shouted that everyone should immediately get out, and it should happen right now, while their opponent was confused. However, suddenly he himself stopped in his tracks, and the personal fairy tried to call out to him so that the young man would continue to run to the exit. And while everyone was trying to escape by running through the exit, Choi continued to stand still and stare back in awe as the system informed him that his level had been raised. At first, he couldn't understand how it happened, but after thinking for a few minutes, he had an idea that explained the rapid increase in level. It was because all the thalasses who died in the cave collapse brought him points, which further increased his personal level. When the euphoria of what he had done wore off, he decided that it was time to finally get out of here, but he still needed to figure out how to do it because the queen had blocked the entrance. And while Choi realized that she needed something to distract her, the chef got another egg from somewhere and began to wave it in front of his rival's face. As soon as the monster noticed the red giant, he began to offer to make an exchange, which consisted in giving him the egg and giving him freedom. The guy realized that this deal would definitely not work, so he decided to strike the queen at the moment when she was distracted by the chef. However, the guy did not manage to get to her because the queen released a strange, long sticky tape from her mouth, which was clearly supposed to help her in some way. And it turns out that with the help of this, she wrapped Choi's arm and began to pull him towards her, but the chef did not leave him alone in this trouble and attacked the creature. Just a few minutes later, the guy noticed Raedran nearby and was surprised by it. And even at first, he thought it was all his imagination. However, when the interlocutor spoke, it became clear that it was a real live Raedran who came here to help them escape. And in a second, he began to use force to restrain the monster, and then it was screaming because they were trying to destroy it. The young man watched this battle with delight because he had never seen anything like it before, so he wanted to see as much as possible to learn from the experience. After it was over, Choi immediately came to Bobo's room to see him, and he immediately jumped out at him, licking his face. The fairy, watching this picture, emphasized that they managed to get out of there alive, so she thanked out loud the one who came to save them. The guy smilingly said that she could still enjoy the idol because they could soon be deprived of their lives, because everything was just beginning to unfold. The interlocutor emphasized that the young man still managed to pump up, so he is not at the same level as a few hours ago, and this already gives him some chances to win. But when they began to look at the characteristics and how they had changed, Rachel emphasized that her subordinate still had a little bit of everything compared to his opponent. But even the fact that he scored 6,000 points, like his enemy, cannot be a 100% guarantee that he will be able to win the upcoming battle. The fairy, showing the picture of the hero, emphasized that now not only strength but also magic is important. So if Choi wants to defeat the enemy, he must use it. The guy was not so happy about this, but the interlocutor said that he had already used magic once, although he did not notice it. And these words made the guy think, and he suddenly remembered that there was one moment when he felt a strange energy, but then he did not pay much attention to it, and it turns out that it was magic. A minute later, this conversation was interrupted because someone knocked on the door and then quickly opened the door, and this unexpected guest was Reedran. When the young man saw him, he did not know how to react, whether to be surprised or happy, so he just came closer and asked the giant why he came here. However, the giant did not answer the question, but simply told him in a serious tone that they should go together to the commander because she wanted to see them. As soon as they were in Hemis's office, the the girl began to wonder what exactly brought Reborn to this area, emphasizing that she wanted to hear the truth. And the giant did not hesitate to ask the commander for permission to personally teach Choi to fight, and these words surprised the boy standing next to him. The young lady folded her arms, paused for a moment, then smiled slightly and asked a question to understand why her colleague wanted to do this. And Reborn began to explain that the guy's opponent was several times stronger, so he did not really want to lose the guy at this stage. After that, the man began to say that this young man has a lot of potential, so he is personally interested in finding out what heights he can reach. Listening to all these words, Choi stood silently and thought that the commander would never in a million years agree to this proposal for security reasons. However, after a moment's pause, the young lady joyfully raised her hands in the air and loudly exclaimed that she agreed to everything. And then her interlocutor calmly thanked her. Then she said that they could leave her office if they had said everything she wanted to say, because she was going to have a little rest now. As soon as the two left and the door closed behind them, Hemis smiled and said to herself that his strength had grown a lot since the last time she had met Choi. She decided for herself that it was even interesting to watch a person develop so quickly, but at the same time, it was starting to annoy her for some reason. And all because her chosen opponent could lose to this young man, so she decided to intervene to equalize the chances of these two to win. A few hours later, Reborn and Choi came to a large training ground, and the giant said that this place was his personal property. Looking around, the boy could not believe that this scale belonged to only one person, so he assumed that Hemis was very fond of Reborn. At this time, the giant was thinking in his head that the boy has a large amount of mana, but there is a drawback that he does not know how to use it at all. But at the same time, he increases his strength very quickly, and therefore uses only it, although he can use mana in order not to waste other resources. Reborn realized that they should start training from the base, but they didn't have time for that because the fight was to take place in 4 days, so he attacked the young man with his fists. Choi didn't have time to dodge or defend himself, so he fell on his back from the blow and began to think about what was going on because he was just supposed to be training. Therefore, as he calmly got up, he did not even realize that the giant would continue to attack him, but at the same time he told him to use mana to save himself. Until the young man started to act, the opponent was able to find out that the body of this young man had no special strength, but he was no match for well-trained knights in terms of reaction and ability to see. After that, Reborn decided to continue the battle in order to understand what Choi's strengths were, and then they would develop him in this direction. But before that, they had to make sure that the boy learned to use his mana, because without it, he simply would not win in the upcoming battle. Therefore, the giant switched to serious techniques and used magic to shout that it was better for the boy to die here and now than to be disgraced in front of everyone. During this blow, the young man realized that his teacher was very serious and that if he missed another blow, it could cost him his life. As soon as he thought about it, Reborn pushed off from the ground and flew at him with his hand outstretched to attack him once again. Each one realized that either he blocks this attack or dies, so he put his fist forward and decided to try to use the mana he had. During this, a small explosion occurred, which left the boy on the ground without his upper body, and the mentor who came over said that the young man was able to use the mana. The boy could not get up yet, but he gave a thumbs up and a big smile to show his joy. Then Reborn took the boy by the hand and emphasized that if he continued in the same spirit, he would be able to win the upcoming battle. But for now, he asked him to lie down quietly so that he could heal his body. As soon as the giant began to use his ability, he saw that Choi began to writhe in pain, and only now he remembered that dark mana acts like poison on people. So the creature quickly completed his trick and took the boy in his arms, apologized, and then said that he would take him to a place where he would be rescued. And while he was carrying him, he told him that the forces that created this world are in constant struggle, and it turns out that dark mana neutralizes ordinary mana, and ordinary mana, in turn, neutralizes divine mana. But the divine power neutralizes the dark mana, and it turned out that the ordinary mana belongs to people, but the dark mana belongs to demons. And the divine mana was given to the servants of God because they are the part of this world that does not participate in any kind of conspiracy or battle. And it so happened that in this area there is an empire that chose as a leader the one who can hear the voice of God, and so everyone began to treat her as a holy person. That's why one of the next saints is now in a room guarded by goblins, and they do not hesitate to discuss aloud that she is here. And all because they captured her and brought her to their domain and believed that they could say whatever they wanted because she had to obey them. The girl had not said a word since she was locked in the room. She just sat on the bed and looked out the big window and never prayed. The fact that she did not do so alarmed the guards a little, but the young lady heard this and thought that she had no reason to turn to God. Suddenly, all the peace and quiet was broken by the voice of Reborn, who began to address the saint in the corridor because he was carrying a young man who needed his help. However, he did not explain this from the very beginning because as soon as he entered the room, the blonde woman reproached him for his rude and shameless behavior. But the giant didn't even pay attention to these words because he was more concerned with something else, so he demonstrated to the young man that he needed to be healed. At this time, Choi was unconscious and felt that his head hurt very badly and tried to remember what had happened to him. However, not remembering anything, he thought that he could not die holding a man's hand like that and decided that it would be better if it was Rachel. But a few minutes later, when he opened his eyes, he saw a blonde beauty in front of him and could not understand whether it was this world or whether he had died again and moved to another. And for some reason, he believed in the second option, so he began to cry, saying that he would never forgive the angel who did not give him the opportunity to become an archmagician by the age of 30. Not paying attention to his savior, the guy continued to say that he wanted to send Rachel to hell because she was a real demon who was abusing him. After that, he turned to the blonde and said that before he was reborn, he had one wish that she could fulfill personally, and a minute later he asked if she could marry him. These words took the young lady by surprise because she expected to hear some impudent words, but not such a proposal. And as soon as she said just one word, he realized that something was wrong, so he began to listen to the sounds around him to assess the situation. A second later, someone pulled his shirt off the bed to give him a big hug, and it was Reborn, who was happy that he had survived. And only after that, the young man realized that he was not really dead, and that the blonde girl was real, and he had told her so much nonsense. At this time, the giant asked the saint if Choi had been completely healed, and she told him that he had not yet, and that it was evident in the way he spoke and stood. The girl then added that the dark mana was still in his body, although she could not even imagine how it could get there and exist for so long. Reborn asked if it was possible to destroy this dark mana with the help of divine power, for that was what he had hoped for when he brought the young man here. The saint turned her head to the side and replied that if something went wrong, the young man would die, so she advised him to just wait a little longer, and the mana would leave his body. The giant was very upset by this news, and began to apologize to Choi for what had happened, and promised that he would repay him with personal training. Hearing these words, the girl was surprised that the demon was training a human, and therefore asked what kind of man he was if he was lucky enough to develop like that. However, she never got a clear answer. But a few days later, Bobo was able to take Choi to his room because he missed him so much. The boy was happy about it because he could no longer be in the place where they were supposedly trying to cure him, and he said that the place looked like hell to him. However, as soon as he found himself in a familiar place, he began to cry because he had suffered so much, and the dark mana still remained in his body. After calming down a little, the young man looked around and turned to Rachel and asked her if he could die after all that had happened. At this time, the girl was sitting on the floor and crying bitterly because she was sad and offended that her hero had gone through such suffering at the very beginning of his journey. The young man began to say that she should not be so upset, but the young lady said that it was her fault that the dark magic was in his body and that he almost died. The man did not understand what Rachel was getting at, but she explained that it was because she was a demon with an angelic face who deserved to burn in hell. And then Choi realized that she was offended by his words, so he came closer, stroked the fairy, and said that he was joking, and added that no one has such great assistant. The girl did not respond so quickly to consolation, and so the guy began to think about how to calm this young lady who holds a grudge against him. But he decided not to act hastily, so he went to training, and 3 days later a saint came to him and told him that she wanted to heal him if he completed all his work for the day. With a smile on his face, the young man agreed to this, so he quickly took off his upper body clothes and lay down in front of the blonde woman to start working. As soon as she touched his hand, Choi said that he had one request and immediately voiced it, saying that he wanted the saint to pray for him before tomorrow's fight. The girl did not answer, but continued to work, and the young man did not miss the opportunity to ask if she could come and watch his fight tomorrow. The saint did not give a clear answer, and the next day everyone gathered around the arena to see the duel with their own eyes. Hemis, sitting next to Reborn, decided to make a bet with him that if Choi won, the demon would continue to train him. Before giving his answer, the giant asked what the condition would be if the boy lost, since it was not known how today's event would end. The girl folded her arms on the table and smiled slyly and said that if the boy loses, then Reborn will have to personally take his life. At this time, Choi had already entered the battlefield, and the one who was conducting it said to the audience that he would now introduce the participants in turn. While all the formalities were being done and announced, the guy stood and thought that he was in his best shape now, and therefore not worried. That's because in a short period of time, he has acquired a new ability and a new skill, and because of this, he is much stronger than he was before. Continuing to stand still, the young man convinced himself that he had to win this race, and after that he wanted to go on a date with the blonde lady. Choi's opponent was very strong and serious about this battle, and he did not even think that he could lose to an ordinary person in a normal battle. The guy looked at the enemy and saw that he had changed a bit since the last time, and even Reborn noticed it, and he got to his feet in shock. And all because the power of this creature has grown to 10,000 in just a few days, and this means only one thing: they are not in equal conditions of battle. However, the young man had no chance to refuse this fight, so he did not lose heart and realized that he just had to hold on and try to win. And a second later, when the bell rang for the fight to begin, the giant opponent began to swing his bat, which could kill Choi immediately. After the first unsuccessful strike, the guy realized that his opponent was very big and that the trajectory of his movements could be guessed, so he could try to dodge. And then, when a good opportunity arises, the guy will try to deliver a direct blow and see how it will affect him and whether there is any benefit from it at all. And literally, in a matter of minutes, he managed to deliver several intended blows, but the opponent did not even move from them, so it became clear that it did not work. And while Choi was distracted, the creature was able to strike him, which he did not dodge, and therefore received a serious injury in which his left arm was broken. Then the guy started looking at the enemy again to see if he also had any serious injuries, and it turned out that he was healthy, with only a few scratches. As soon as the creature began to move again, the young man realized that his opponent's movements were still expected, so he could be guided by this. But then a memory from the training where Reborn told him that during the battle he needed to have some tactics and use magic flashed through his mind. While the opponent continued to prepare to make another attack, the young man tried to understand how he should act right now to make everything happen the way he wanted. And in just a few seconds, he realized that he just needed to find the desire that would push him to destroy the enemy. And this is what really gave the young man such confidence, that he used mana to deprive the enemy of life, who could destroy him at any moment. After this collision, there was a small explosion that caused dust to spread throughout the arena, making it impossible to see who won the battle. But as soon as the ground began to show, the voice of the tournament announcer announced that a man named Choi, who was participating for the first time, had won. The guy raised his hand up, smiled broadly, and rejoiced in his victory, but at the same time realized that if he used this skill twice in a row, he would die from it. Rachel, who was nearby, began to say with admiration that the young man had really managed to strike right in the heart, but he still did not fully believe that he had really won. And while there was a few minutes pause in the arena, the opponent began to slowly get to his feet, and everyone else in the arena noticed. Looking at the victim, Choi continued to sit on a stone and think about what the commander had done to this creature to make him so resilient. Reborn had already guessed that Hemina had shared her dark mana with the young man's rival and put a curse of immortality on him. The giant did not voice all his guesses out loud. Instead, he said, emphasizing that Choi's enemy was able to master martial arts in such a short time. It was a real talent. Rachel, in turn, began to report to her subordinate that his opponent was now moving due to the effect of the spell that had been cast on him, but it should end soon. However, there was no time to rest or think of something, because the creature was ready to attack again, just as it had done before. Choi missed the first few blows, so he was slightly hurt, but the third time he grabbed the attacker's arm and tried his best to hurt him. And at some point he found a weak spot that he began to press quickly, and this caused another explosion that sent the guy flying high up. Then he was thrown to the side by the blast wave, and because of this he hit a stone, and again felt those feelings that are similar to the fact that all the bones in the body are breaking. The saint, who was sitting on the podium at the time and watching the young man, mentally turned to him and asked him to get up, and a minute later added that he could do it. At first, Choi continued to lie there without moving, but after a few seconds, he quietly asked if he could win, and the lady gave an affirmative answer. And these words gave him the strength to get back on his feet, and he told himself that he could not fail in front of the girl he had asked out. Therefore, touching the ground with one hand, the young man decided to use mana to cover himself with armor, since most of his bones were really broken. After that, he pushed off the ground, jumped high, and waved the mana to the saint to officially ask her out. And without waiting for an answer, Choi did what he was going to do, and his opponent not only staggered from his blow, but even bent down to spit out blood. As soon as the guy saw the good result after his first punch, he approached the enemy and began to beat him with a smile on his face. Everyone was shocked to see this, because this had never happened before in the heat of battle, and even Hemis herself did not expect such a development. That's why the commander asked if Reborn had taught these techniques to Choi, and he gave a negative answer, after which the interlocutor emphasized that the young man was really some kind of monster. After everything was over, the guy woke up abruptly and immediately began to ask the people around him where he was at the moment. The fairy who was entertaining Bobo asked a counter question, and the young man began to ask about the results of the battle and how everything went, and about the experience he had. Rachel answered that Choi was victorious, after which the saint healed him and left the place. After hearing this information, the young man decided to review the characteristic. While she was trying to explain that she could also heal him, he did not react to her because he was busy studying the value, which had grown considerably. As soon as he moved to the mana control mark, the fairy reacted violently to the change and explained that this characteristic usually increases the slowest and not so quickly. At this time of the holiday, sitting in the room where she was being held, she went to the window and sadly looked at the starry sky, which was somehow shining in a special way tonight. She also couldn't get the thought of Choi out of her mind, who seemed very strange to her because he was able to learn martial arts and use mana so quickly. And all this was surprising because an ordinary person simply cannot do it. And because of this, we can assume that the guy has a great hidden potential that needs to be revealed. Then the blonde woman threw a purple cloak over her shoulders and summarized for herself that by winning this battle, Choi changed his life and now it will not be the same as before. So she began to think that maybe he was the hope she had been waiting for, and maybe he would help her escape. And when she came to the door of her room, she knocked quietly several times, and the guard who stood on the other side asked the girl what she wanted. The blonde girl said in a sweet voice that she had one request, and immediately voiced it, which was that she wanted to take a short walk around the territory. At that time, Choi found a small note on his bed that said he was to meet the saint after the sun went down. It was very exciting for the young man, so he could not control himself and calm down while waiting at the meeting place because he did not know how to behave during the date. Rachel, who was nearby, said that he had come here in vain, so she suggested that he go back to the room, and the young man did not like it and grabbed her again with one hand. However, he didn't have time to do or say anything wrong because at that very moment he saw the very young lady he had been waiting for several minutes. However, he saw two giants next to her and asked why they came with her, and she explained that she was not allowed to walk here alone. Choi was still acting strangely because he was very nervous and couldn't calm himself down, but the girl didn't mind and suggested they walk instead. As soon as they walked a few meters, the guy started to think that he was so nervous that he didn't even know how to start a conversation or what to talk about. Therefore, the young lady started the conversation first, and what she asked was somehow sudden, and all because the young lady asked if her interlocutor was a hero. The guy froze in his tracks and asked how she knew, and the girl explained that in her world, only heroes or demons have black hair. After that, the girl looked at the young man and said that she could see by his expression that he had a lot of questions and gave him permission to ask them now. Choi was excited to think about what to say first, but decided to ask if a man like him was suitable for the saint, because it was the most important thing for him. The other person did not have time to answer because their calm atmosphere was broken by a red giant who was moving very quickly in their direction. When the guy saw it, the first question that came to mind was what this giant was doing here, and then he thought that his mood would definitely be spoiled. As soon as Reborn approached, he said that the commander wanted to see the boy, and he gritted his teeth whether this meeting should take place right now. After learning the final answer, Choi went to the meeting, leaving the blonde girl who realized that she could not trust him so quickly. When she arrived at the office, Hemina said that she really liked watching how the young man behaved during the battle to save his life. Then she asked if the young man remembered the terms of their agreement, and he replied with a smile that he remembered everything well, so she had to ensure his safety for a month. After that, the commander said that she had made a joke when making this agreement because she believed that he would be killed by her men very quickly. After a short pause, the lady added that now she had a completely different opinion because she remembered the words of Reborn, who said that this guy had great potential. Therefore, she said that this time she wanted to try something else instead of a duel because she could not put such a special personality as an ordinary commander. Next, Hemina said that there were some changes in their kitchen, and now they are having problems with the supply of meat because they lost a lot of cooks during the last hunt. Choi could not understand why the young lady was telling him all this, and the woman came closer and said that from now on, the young man was the commander of the company of cooks. After that, the woman took him by the hand and emphasized that starting tomorrow, the work in the kitchen should be organized, along with the meat supply. When the young man left the office, Rachel began to mock him, saying that he was not a hero at all, but the commander of an entire company of cooks. The young man did not take these words seriously and replied that for some reason, he thought that the interlocutor was still angry with him, and that is why she was speaking like that. So he suggested that they get down to business and not just talk about nothing that would not help them in the long run. And just a few minutes later, they entered the kitchen and saw the wizard right in front of them and asked what he was doing. The creature turned to face Chev and called him a slave, saying that it was grilling meat, and that's why it was sitting almost dead at the very entrance to the room. The guy did not like the fact that this creature called him a slave, so he angrily began to step forward to teach the other person a lesson. After hitting the sorcerer, he ordered him to call everyone in the room to him, and while they were gathering, he used the glasses to assess their strength. As soon as everyone came, the young man wondered why there were so few of them, because when he first came here, there were 300 of them, and now there are less than 20. But then he began to convince himself that he had to do everything in the best way possible, so he asked his subordinates to raise their hands if they knew who he was. One of the goblins called him a tasty man for fun, and then he found himself slammed into the wall because Choi hit him and at the same time told him that he was their boss. Then the young man said that his first rule was to treat him as a commander, and then he asked those who knew why there were so few of them to stand up. In a few seconds, one of the subordinates stood up and said that many goblins decided to go hunting and were killed by demonic animals. The young man listened attentively and said that it was not surprising for him to hear that, because they always attack first and then asked who was the best cook here. Everyone unanimously said the name Gomam, and Choi emphasized that this creature would be the vice captain of the revival and then allowed everyone to leave. Then the guy sat on a wooden bench and began to think that there should be at least 200 workers in the kitchen, and he needed to find them somewhere. After spending almost the whole night thinking, the next morning the guy went for a walk with Bobo to implement his plan B. And it turned out that it consisted of recruiting workers on the street, but not all of them, but those who would not be able to stand up to him in the end. For this purpose, Choi also used his glasses to know at what level the creature he was going to take as a subordinate was. At first, he attacked the green goblins sharply, and when they turned their attention to him, he asked if they were ready to become cooks in the kitchen. There were those who quickly agreed, and there were those who had to be beaten up to make them realize that such an offer was a good option for. At some point, the young man came across one who was not affected by anything, so he decided to try to verbally convince him by deceiving him that he was his first employee for the day. Seeing the misunderstanding on the other man's face, Choi began to explain with a smile that his position in the army was important, so if he joined now, he would not have so many bosses over him. After that, the guy told the goblin to go and bring him some of his smaller relatives so that he could continue to beat them. The green creature did not fully understand what they wanted from him because he did not want to agree to anything, and then they put forward some conditions. At this time, the commander of the Third Army of the Demon King was sitting at his dining room table, savoring a large piece of meat and praising how deliciously it was cooked. Suddenly, the door to his room opened abruptly, and one of his subordinates shouted loudly that they had a problem that needed to be solved immediately. He immediately said that most of the members of their battalion had simply left, and the commander could not believe it, because those creatures had nothing else to do but serve him. The interlocutor excitedly added that all those who had left them had joined a group of cooks that began to expand with a new mentor. However, the commander remembered that this group would be led by a man whom Hemis cared about very much, so he decided not to interfere in any way, but he did ask for a warning. However, the subordinate said that things could not be left like this, and said that 200 soldiers had already been lured away from their battalion by the cooks. At this time, Choi was sitting on his chair and rejoiced to hear the number of demons he had managed to gather in order to attract them to the army of cooks. He decided that this number should be enough for them to realize their plan, and that is why he was about to announce that they were stopping the recruitment. However, he didn't have time to say it out loud because he saw a large green stranger on his right side whose face showed dissatisfaction. Putting on his strength goggles, he saw nothing and realized that this gentleman was very strong because his device did not show too many numbers. Choi turned in the opposite direction and wanted to run away, but he couldn't because Doros, the commander of the 3rd Battalion, called his name and he had to stop. As soon as they were opposite each other, the guy asked what happened, and the other man did not answer and asked what he was thinking about. He paused for a moment and then pointed his index finger at the crowd of goblins and added that the young man was thinking about what he was doing when he lured their people to him. The young man was amused by the whole situation because he did not even realize that the fools he met on the street had taken their fellow goblins to him. Then, for a more serious conversation, the two moved to the office where Choi explained that he did not intentionally take these people because it just happened that they were all from the same battalion. After receiving this answer, the interlocutor made a little tube of his lips and began to think that the commander liked this guy, so everything should be resolved peacefully. And because of this, Doros said, smiling broadly, that now he understood everything, and therefore he allowed to take those whom the interlocutor had chosen for his work. When the guy heard this, he could not believe it, because he was already preparing for the worst-case scenario, and then everything turned out to be much better than he could have imagined. Suddenly, the green giant stopped laughing and said that he still had a certain condition that he wanted his new friend to fulfill. And after a short pause, he added that Choi should take another of his subordinates to his team, because he really wanted to, but did not have time to get in during the recruitment. The guy realized that this was already starting to sound suspicious, so he had to be careful not to bring a member to his squad who would turn them in. The adult realized by the expression on his face that the boy was going to refuse, and reproached him for daring to do so after taking all his soldiers. The young man realized that he had to agree, because it could end badly. So a minute later, he was faced with Usaru's new subordinate, a hybrid of an ogre and an orc. Putting on his goggles, Choi didn't see a specific strength number, but he realized that this creature was strong, so he would need to find a worthy use for it. While they stood in silence for a few minutes, the creature broke it to tell him that he had a headache and was eager to rest. After his meeting was over, Choi went out to the people he had gathered to introduce himself once again and emphasize that he was the new chef. Bobo was standing next to him at the time, so he had to explain that he was responsible for this animal, so no one had the right to insult it or look at it in any way. While he was explaining all this, he waved a large bone in Bobo's face to make him behave normally in front of so many people. After that, the guy turned his attention to the group of people and said that he wanted to reorganize them so that everyone knew what their responsibilities were. While all the team members were trying to line up in certain rows, Choi told Rachel that he had created this lineup based purely on the combat skills of each of them. The girl pretended to be interested in hearing this, so he told her that he had put the weakest and those who could cook well in charge of the kitchen. As soon as the subordinates finished their formation, the young man folded his arms across his chest and said that from now on, the right squad would be the cooks and the left squad would be the fighters. Suddenly, one of the cooks raised his hand and said that he also wanted to be a fighter so that he could go hunting and eat the freshest meat. Choi rubbed his head and smiled broadly, and without any reproaches or complaints, he allowed the creature to move quietly from one pen to another to satisfy his desire. However, no one expected to see what happened next, because the boy kicked the goblin who was just about to change his group after receiving permission. But the guy did it to demonstrate to the others that everything will go as he planned, and no one has the right to change what is about to happen. After this gesture, the system began to issue notifications that the level of latent ability was increased and that the leadership category was also increased. Then the young man turned to show his clenched hand in a fist and shouted that since everything was already set up, the squad of soldiers should get ready because they were going hunting today. In just a few minutes, Choi and his men arrived at a large and dense forest to the west of the Black Palace. As soon as everyone came to the clearing, the guy folded his arms across his chest and said that today the forest was especially quiet, and the fairy suggested that it might be because of the presence of Bobo or Usaru. The boy did not deny this assumption, but on the contrary agreed, saying that these were their best soldiers, so they should not be left behind. Then Rachel suggested creating a bait, but there were some problems with this because due to the lack of meat, they all went hunting so quickly. However, the interlocutor did not see anything wrong with this, and even said, smiling, that then they just needed to use another bait. And just a minute later, she said that monsters can be lured by those who attracted demonic creatures with their presence on the way here. So Choi went out to the crowd and started calling names, and as soon as he finished, he said that these participants should step forward right now. Without really explaining anything, the guy went up to Uzaru, closed his eyes, and said that the creature could begin to fulfill his duties right this minute. And the giant took the number 14 in his hands and threw it in front of him in order to attract the attention of the demon monsters so that they would come here. At the same time, the young man stood nearby and with his eyes closed rejoiced because if they tried to throw the weaklings as bait, it would definitely attract the attention of the animal. Choi then turned to one of his assistants and asked him to light a fire so that their lost friends could see the smoke and return. The fairy asked if these creatures would die because the blow was very severe, and the interlocutor emphasized that 1 in 6 would definitely return. When the subordinates heard the order, they began to discuss among themselves that they had a feeling that their boss had gone crazy because they might die today. Therefore, one of the goblins turned in the opposite direction and said that they had better run away now in order to escape, because otherwise not everyone would return home. And as soon as he was about to do so, Bobo appeared on his way, and so the creature changed his mind abruptly, saying that he was ready to devote his whole life to this army. At this time, Choi stood with his arms folded, saying that those whom they sent in the first group were already late, and it was beginning to be alarming. However, just a minute later, one of the green creatures appeared on the horizon, running away, and loudly asking for help because he was being chased by a monster from which he could not escape. The guy was happy about this development because in such cases, he would only have to strike the last blow, which would bring him points and experience. However, what happened next made the young man kneel down and express his dissatisfaction because Bobo and Uzaru had dealt with all the monsters with just one punch. After a bit of sadness and emotions, Choi said that they would return here tomorrow, but without these two, and the fairies emphasized that they had only one left to do everything. After returning from the unsuccessful hunt, the guy came to the kitchen to see if he could cook something from the flattened meat. Before opening the door with his foot, the guy adjusted himself, and then, turning to his subordinates, asked where they were and ordered them all to come to him. The head of the kitchen was the first to ask what had happened, and the young man answered the question by clarifying whether the cooks had received the meat that had been hunted today. Gollum folded his hands in front of him and began to smile in confusion because he did not know how to answer correctly. So he carefully began to say that they had received it, but it looked a little bad. Choi pretended to be very surprised by this answer and said that a true warrior should be able to do everything, hinting that this meat should be able to be cooked. A second later, he added that a cook should be able to cook something not only from meat, but also from minced meat, and the man said that he had never done this before in his life, but he was ready to try. After letting go of the man, the guy started thinking and came to the conclusion that everyone younger than the battalion commander was eating bad food. So the young man decided to change the schedule, and in a few minutes, he was knocking on the saint's door to have a conversation with her. Standing in the doorway, Choi said with a big smile that he had come to visit the girl because they had not seen each other in person for a long time. After that, he showed her a plate with a cooked dish and said that thanks to her support, he was able to win the final of the duel, so as a token of gratitude, he wanted to treat her. The blonde woman replied that she would definitely try it, and approaching the plate, cut off a piece and smelling it, realized that it would flavor better than she expected. Then, she happily placed the piece in her mouth and chewed it, and was pleasantly surprised, because it was definitely several times better than what she was eating now, and it turned out to be a very tasty dish. In a few minutes, the young lady ate everything, so Choi saw the empty plate and concluded that the dish he had prepared was delicious. And as soon as he was about to leave the room, the blonde asked him a question to find out what he should do after leaving this place. The guy didn't think about his answer for a long time, so he immediately said that he wanted to get married. But that was not the answer the woman wanted to get, so she allowed the young man to leave the room. Seeing this reaction, Choi added that there was something else he wanted to do, and as soon as he saw the interested look on his face, the young man could not finish his sentence. Instead, he turned the conversation to her and asked her what she would do if she could escape from this place, because he was also interested in hearing her answer. The saint lowered her head down and sadly said that she had not even thought about it, so she did not know what to say because she had no desires or dreams during her stay here. At this time, in the Divine Empire, one of the Chief Lord's servants came to the Chief Lord and told him that they had finally found out the location of the next saint. He immediately said that he had been informed that the girl was being held in custody in a dark palace where a monster slayer lived. After hearing this, the chief asked if he had heard anything from the Demon King and received a negative answer, which was alarming because for some reason no one imposed conditions on them. And because of this, the people of the Divine Empire simply did not understand what to do, because now they could not attack the palace because it could lead to their death. So, after some thought, the man went to the window, pulled back the curtain with his hand, and said that it would be better to send a rescue team to that area secretly. In this way, the gentleman wants to check how well the girl is guarded, and whether it is possible to get her without starting a big battle. At this time, Choi was walking in the right direction with his backpack on his shoulders and thinking about what the saint meant when she said that she wanted nothing after escaping. However, he quickly ended all these thoughts because, according to his calculations, he had already arrived where he needed to go, and putting down his backpack, ordered his deputies to come forward. As soon as they complied with his request, the young man took out several pieces of meat and offered them a snack before they started the next task. The creatures, with a joyful smile on their faces, could not understand what the boss wanted to tell them with this gesture, so they assumed that it was some kind of bribe or just a real snack. That's why they were in no hurry to take the food in their hands. Then Choi asked if they were really not hungry, and then the subordinates pounced on the meat, quickly chewing every tasty piece. After everything was eaten, the creatures knelt down and began to swear allegiance, but at the same time asked for another piece for a snack. The young man said with a mysterious smile that he would not give them anything now, and ordered them to go hunting, and after that, they would be able to enjoy fresh meat. As he watched his subordinates head deep into the forest, Choi folded his arms across his chest and said out loud that he knew that everyone was a slave to their stomach. It had been several hours since the hunt had begun, and the boss had managed to level up 10 of his levels just by giving the monsters their last blows. Suddenly, one of his subordinates approached him and asked him with a sweet expression who had won the competition he had announced at the very beginning. The young man took a confident pose and said that Vulcan's squad had definitely won, so he would share a delicious meal with them, and the others could pick up the leftovers. Then they all gathered together to bring the meat to the kitchen, and at this time some strange and terrible events were happening in the Dark Palace. All this was happening next to the room where the saint was kept, but she did not even suspect anything. She just continued to live her evening as usual. At some point, the door to the room opened, and a stranger in a long black cloak entered and immediately told her the full name of the girl being held there. Then the visitor took off his hood, and under it was a young blonde boy who, smiling broadly and sweetly, told the saint that he had come to save her. As soon as the young lady saw who it was, she immediately recognized him, so she addressed him as Hephaestus and asked if her father had sent him here, or perhaps someone else. The interlocutor did not give a clear answer, so the saint looked down and apologized and said that she had no intention of returning. And because of this, she emphasized that the young man could go back, but he said that he could not go back without her because he needed to complete his mission. The blonde girl continued to say that she would not go anywhere from here, so she asked if her savior knew that the monster slayer himself lived in this palace. Giffen came closer and smiled sarcastically and said that he knew about it, but did not understand what the problem was, so the girl hinted that she could summon him using her power. This made the boy angry, and he grabbed the young lady tightly with both hands and emphasized that he was now in the place, and therefore he was not a prince but a soldier. After all this, the young man looked the lady straight in the eye and told her to finally fall asleep, and when she woke up, she would be in her capital. During these words, the saint felt that her rescuer was trying to use different forces, but she could not understand how he managed to do it. The only thing she knew for sure was that she did not want to return home. And at some point, the real salvation for the blonde really came, because Choi appeared in the room and punched Giffen and ordered him to take his hands away from the girl. The unknown guest analyzed the punch and said that magic was used during it, but his offender looked like an ordinary person, so he asked who he was. Choi was not going to answer or explain anything. It was important for him at the moment that the unknown blonde man take his hands off the young lady. The young man was not going to back down, so he swung his leg and struck his opponent, saying that he would also go with them so that they could find out who he was. As soon as the blonde attacker managed to knock out both the saint and her savior, he looked at them and said out loud that they were all beginning to irritate him. A fairy flew to all this noise, and seeing that Giffen was able to knock out the hero with just one blow, she did not know what to do, and even thought to bring Bobo. However, she didn't have time to do it because what happened next caught her attention and made her stay a little longer to understand everything. And all because the blonde attacker unfolded a large sheet of paper and began to calmly look at it and study the content that was written by hand. As it turned out, in order for him to take another person with him, he had to find out how to do it using his power and magic. Suddenly, at that moment, Hemis appeared in the doorway and with a mysterious smile turned to the boy and asked if he had any problems and needed help. The blonde boy quickly turned around and saw the monster fighter in front of him, and it scared him a little because he used a special blocking device to prevent him from feeling it. The young lady, hearing his statement, calmly took a few steps forward and emphasized that she likes to be called a Gurnam and not a fighter. Giffen had no choice but to stand still, but at the same time he thought that he did not feel any magical energy from the girl and assumed that it was possible due to the difference in their strength. Then he looked her up and down and thought that the story they had been told since childhood might be true, because this lady looked like someone who could eat 1,000 soldiers in one day. While he was quietly thinking about all this, Hemis was no longer willing to stay here for long, so she opened her arms and said that she was ready to see what the guest was capable of. The blonde grabbed his sheet with his teeth and began to convince himself that he did not need to panic and, most importantly, simply block all attacks that would be directed in his direction. However, just a minute later, Hephaestus felt dizzy, and then he realized that he was too late to do anything to save himself and the saint. At this time, Hemis had already transformed a part of her body into a monster, and smiling slyly emphasized that the young man had very good handwriting, so she asked if he would make her laugh again. But after standing there for a few seconds, the young man felt some strange power and thought that it would be a miracle if he could escape from here, even without the saint. And in just a second, a large stream of yellow energy was formed in the room, spreading from the floor to the ceiling, and a message appeared that Giffen's mission had failed. Hemis calmly watched this and realized that the guest had simply run away after she asked him for a small favor, but this did not upset her. The fighter is an ancient monster and an immortal witch, as Hemis herself called it, who was the commander of the 3rd Corps of the demon army. Throughout the endless flow of time, many demons were born, but just as many died, and only the Demon King and Hemis remained alive and well. However, the endless flow of time has dulled many things, and many different ways have emerged to destroy these creatures once and for all in this world. The next morning, during his regular training, Choi was hit by a punch from Raid Run, who pointed out that the boy still fights head-on even when he uses magic. When the boy turned to his back, the coach added that he needed to be more flexible and that he should not put himself in any kind of box. Choi tiredly said that he would take these tips into account, so Riedran decided to say one more thing about how no matter how strong his student becomes, there will still be someone stronger. Then he held out his hand so that the boy could stand up and told him not to be afraid to use any methods to win. As soon as the boy stood up, the other man smiled lightly and said that their training was over for the day, so the student could go about his business. Choi just smiled sweetly in response, and when Riedran turned his back on him, he fell to the ground and asked Rachel to heal him because he didn't feel well. The girl immediately began to use her powers to alleviate the condition of her subordinate, while she reproached him for using her as an elixir for treating wounds. The guy didn't say anything to these words because in his head, he was now scrolling through a memory where the saint advised him to become stronger in order to save his life. And suddenly he called out the name of this blonde, which angered his fairy because she did not understand how Choi could think of her after he almost died during the rescue. After listening carefully to the reproaches of his interlocutor, the young man wondered why the so-called holy guest attacked his relative when he was supposed to be protecting her. However, he did not think about it for a long time and told Rachel to close the subject, but the young lady was not even going to do so because she did not like something about it. As soon as she assumed that the young man might actually like the holidays, she began to shout loudly that he was wasting his time if he was going to build a relationship with her. Choi did not respond to these words. He just calmly got up and went to his room to rest before work. After a few weeks of a busy schedule, he sat next to his bed and said out loud that in his next life, he wanted to be a cat in a wealthy family. Rachel, who was nearby, turned to Bobo and asked him if he was also worried about their master's condition because they still don't understand what happened. And all because 30 minutes ago, Hemis called the boy to her house to tell him something because they hadn't met for a long time. As soon as the guy entered her office, the young lady said that she had been feeling very sad lately, so she wanted to watch something that would cheer her up. Then she made a small pause, after which she emphasized in a serious tone that the guy would have only 1 month to defeat the battalion commander. Seeing the confusion on Choi's face, Hemis began to clarify whether there were any problems with her request, and then asked if the young man needed any help. The boy quickly bowed low and replied that he did not need anything because he could handle this task on his own without the help of those who might interfere. Moving to the room after the meeting, the young man did not know how to get out of this situation, and the fairy, in turn, told Bobo to say goodbye to the young man because they would not see each other for a long time. After that, Rachel flew up to Choi and began to reassure him that he had to pull himself together because he would not be able to become a battalion commander with only 9,000 men. The young man wanted to lose the lady so that she wouldn't stop him from crying, but she continued to say that he had really grown a lot, but a battalion commander was a completely different level. And then Choi finally answered something to the point, saying that these commanders have about 40,000 troops, and there is no way he can reach that level in just a month. Then the guy said that it would be good if Bobo could participate in the battle instead of him, because he would be able to fight with the commander on equal terms, or even win. The fairy, hearing this idea, said that it would be impossible to realize it, because the battle was meant to be a duel, not some kind of fantasy battle. And these words prompted Choi to make a decision, so he asked Rachel what the commander had said to him, and the girl repeated that he had a month to defeat his opponent. Hearing these words again, he decided that there was no mention of a battle, so he had to defeat the battalion commander in another way. The fairy did not really believe in these words, so she asked him if he understood the meaning of these words correctly, and emphasized that it was not too late to save himself. The young man didn't even want to think about the fight he had to take part in, so he decided that he would lure his opponent outside and then set Bobo on him. After listening carefully to this plan, Rachel expressed her opinion, saying that she could not yet understand whether the guy was smart or just a real coward. Then she asked how to lure out this opponent because she was not sure that someone like Choi could interest him as a worthy man to fight. The guy, clenching his hand into a fist, smiled broadly and said that he had an idea, because he had recently met this creature and it looked like it liked to eat a lot. So soon, the young man came to the kitchen to cook the meat he would bring to the battalion commander during the meeting. While preparing the dish, the man enjoyed the fact that soon his idea could come true and he would not have to fight to win. Being in a good mood, the young man felt for the first time like he was in a past life when he was just living his life without worrying about anything. After some time, This idol was broken when Bobo came into the kitchen and Choi had to run after him to play with the animal. During these few minutes, the meat was already cooked, so the boy took it out, put it on a plate, and garnished it with different herbs to make it look better. At this time, the battalion commander was sitting at his dining room table, using a knife and fork to eat his lunch, and he liked the dish very much. Tss. Then the goblin raised both his hands in the air and said out loud that the best decision was to give it to Uzaru Choi to handle. During this joy, one of his assistants entered the room and told the commander that the chef had come to see him in person. At first, the giant wanted to refuse this conversation, but when he heard that the man brought him a dish that he had personally prepared, he abruptly changed his mind. But he was in no hurry to invite the man to the room. First, he remembered that he had heard rumors that this chef was really a chef from God. It was out of curiosity that the commander looked at the door and loudly said that Choi could come in, and in a matter of seconds, he was standing inside. The green giant wiped his lips and said that he had been informed that the guest had come to him to express his gratitude, but it was not yet clear for what exactly. The young man placed a tray on the table and said that he had come to thank the gentleman for helping him become a chef in the kitchen, because this position was his true calling. Choi then opened the lid and said that he had cooked the ribs himself, and that the man smelled the smell and saw the dish and immediately wanted to try it. As the creature cut off a piece and pulled it into his mouth, the guest watched carefully to see if he could conquer this giant with his taste. In a few minutes, after chewing and swallowing everything, the commander looked up and happily said that it was just an unrivaled dish that he had never tasted before. Then the green monster began to praise the meat, which he continued to eat, and Choi could not get enough of the fact that his plan could actually be realized. At the end of the meeting, the guy asked if the other man would mind being the one to taste his new dishes, and the commander gladly agreed to the offer. Going out the door, the young man could not contain his joyful emotions. He smiled broadly and said that so far, everything was going according to the plan he had made for his rescue. But as soon as he came back to the kitchen, he felt sick, and all because his body could not properly tolerate the excitement and emotions that overwhelmed him. Rachel, who was always by his side, was still not sure that something good could come of it, so she asked if the young man was sure about what he was going to do. Wiping his face, the young man said that this was the best option to avoid using combat, so he would first feed his opponent, and when he lost his vigilance, he would cut him down. At this time, the battalion commander was sitting in his favorite chair trying to rest after a delicious lunch and could not move after that. A week later, Choi again visited his enemy with a new dish, but as soon as he took up the knife and fork, he said that he had no appetite today. He explained that it was because he was worried about the fight that was to take place tomorrow to prove that he was really worthy of the position he held. After hearing this news, the young man did not know how to react because he was overwhelmed by various emotions that he could barely control in order not to show his commander. After he stepped aside a bit, tears appeared in Choi's eyes because he had been trying in vain for a whole week because his opponent might be a completely different person. He was so upset that he didn't even know what to do anymore because he was already thinking about how he would be gone in a few weeks. But despite this, the young man came to watch the battle the next day, although he could hardly believe that the giant would win because he had been feeding him for a week and he could barely walk. Choi then noticed that the previous host of the fight, Zack, had been replaced by Roygo, who is the commander of the 3rd Regiment of the Demon King's army. So as soon as the host showed up, he loudly announced that the participants could enter the arena to prepare for the fight that was about to take place. The battalion commander went down the stairs and knelt down and began to cough up because this obstacle had already become a challenge for him. Raising his head to the stands, the giant saw Choi on one of the benches and was glad to see him because he considered him his talisman and was ready to fight with dignity. And after the command to start the battle began, the commander rushed at his opponent, and during their first collision, a powerful explosion occurred. Dodging the blast wave, the young man covered his face, and as soon as everything calmed down, he began to raise his head to see who won. The host, Roigo, also got up from his seat to see who was standing in the arena, and within a few minutes, he said the name of the commander. After the battle, late in the evening, Choi returned to Bobo's room and realized that one animal would not be enough, so he decided to revise the battle plan with his future opponent. So, opening the book he had filled out with his own hand, he began to reread everything he had written down in order to find some trick that would help him win. Rachel, sitting next to him, had already begun to guess what her subordinate was thinking about, but in order to confirm everything, she began to check with him. And he came to the conclusion that if Doris turned out to be such a strong opponent, he had no choice but to push him even stronger. 3 days later, Choi and Rachel came to the big forest because it was the first time they had been outside since they were busy studying information about monsters from the encyclopedia. They immediately identified the first target, and it was only a few kilometers away, and it was a giant worm that was colored purple. In a minute, the fairy told all the information she had learned from the book about this creature. So then she wanted to call her to her side and said that she was just a little genius. After that, Choi approached the group of his subordinates and said that he had already decided on the place of their today's hunt, so they should get ready. But he was in no hurry to give the order because he first wanted to find out more information from the fairy about the demon that looked like the dragon he saw on his map. The girl said that she needed to see what he looked like beforehand because she could not remember everything. So the boy did not insist and simply said that they would meet him today. Before giving the order to start the hunt, Choi turned to his subordinates and said that today they would not catch anyone but would immediately kill them. And as soon as they do their job, they can eat as much meat as they want. And many goblins were happy to hear that their boss had finally come to his senses and allowed them to do what they had been dreaming of doing for a long time. After several hours of hunting, everyone had already hunted a lot of meat, and Choi stood back and thought about why the owner of the land had not yet come out to them. So scratching his head, he assumed that he had started all this in vain. So turning to his subordinates, he said that they could lay down their arm. And everyone quickly began to fulfill this order and then split into small groups to make a fire for cooking meat. And at that moment, Choi heard a strange sound from the depths of the forest. So looking around, he began to think that the one he was waiting for had come. Then he looked up and saw a creature, and in order to assess its strength, he quickly put on his glasses that could measure it. While he stood in one place, his subordinates saw the dragon and began to shout loudly about it, while running around the lawn, gathering things to escape. The only one who was happy to see this creature was Choi, and he did not hide it at all, because he continued to stand in one place, smiling broadly. And all because he saw through his glasses that this dragon was very strong, and therefore with its help, he would be able to defeat his rival Doro. At this time, Reborn came to Hemis's office, and at first he did not understand why the girl called him to her office in the middle of the day. She immediately began to ask about Choi because she hadn't heard from him in more than 3 weeks and was wondering what he was doing there. She suggested that maybe his mentor had taught him something that allowed him to escape from them, but the red giant did not confirm this, only saying that they were doing normal training. Then Hemis asked if the young man could defeat Doros, and Reborn replied that he did not know, but noticed that the boy had become very close to him recently. The young lady was surprised to hear this information because, in her opinion, these two people have nothing in common and spend much time together. After a short pause, the girl emphasized that instead of defeating the battalion captain, Choi had simply become friends with him. After saying that, Hemis smiled to herself, saying that she was already curious to know what this young man was planning to do to save himself. The next day in his office, Doros was sitting at the dining room table and tasting the food, emphasizing that there was nothing tastier than grilled meat. And after finishing his meal, the giant put his hands on his stomach, took a deep breath, and exhaled and thanked Choi for cooking so well for him lately. The guy started laughing lightly without restraint, and the other man was taken by surprise by this reaction, so he immediately began to ask what it could mean. Then the young man abruptly changed his expression to a sad one and replied that he had some problems, and that was why he brought his food here for the last time today. Doros asked why, and Choi explained that the commander wanted to taste the meat of a special beast, but they hadn't been able to defeat it for several days. The Green Goblin did not know how to react to this, because he remembered that he had heard rumors that there were many wounded cooks after the hunt. And the guy continued to talk about this monster, calling it a marble Doros, who heard this name and replied that he had never even heard of it. But at the same time, the creature asked if he could give his warriors to help, and Choi replied that even with 100 additional warriors, he would not be able to defeat this monster. And just then, the moment came that the boy used to his advantage and said that if Doros himself intervened in the next hunt, then they would really defeat the monster. After a short pause, the young man added that the commander would appreciate such help because not everyone in their time is ready to do such thing. Hearing the last sentence, the giant already began to imagine how Hemis summoned him to a personal meeting, and as soon as he arrived, he began to praise him. Choi noticed the interest on the face of his interlocutor and decided to add that he would definitely tell Hemis about this help because they are very close. So only after that, Doros approached the young man and shaking his hand said that he was ready to help him in this situation because they were also friends. The young man pretended to be surprised and asked if it would be convenient for the battalion commander to go hunting, as it was not a job for such people. The Green Giant replied that he didn't care because the main thing for him was to help people who treated him well. And the next morning, Choi and his subordinates stood waiting for a new member of their team to join them for the hunt. Bobo was running next to the guy, and he told him what they would do, because the animal had no idea why it was brought here. He also brought a dog with him, to entertain the dog when Choi had no time to look after the animal. After giving everyone orders and giving instructions, the young man turned in the right direction and said that they were going hunting. Having walked several kilometers, Choi's subordinates could not understand where exactly they were going because they had never been to these places before. In order not to walk all the way on his own, the adult took his subordinate with him to carry him. At some point, the green creature turned to the chef and asked how much further they had to go, and the young man replied that in a few more minutes they would be there. After the answer, the boy looked down, smiled slightly, and thought that he should be more careful because this giant was stronger than it seemed at first glance. Then Choi turned his gaze back and saw that Doros had brought 50 soldiers with him, so he was definitely not going to lose today. At that very moment, the young man abruptly stopped in his tracks, looking up to see the birds flying away and saying that they were already very close to the monster. Doros looked at the monster and decided to clarify whether it was really the one they were looking for, and Choi quickly gave an affirmative answer to this question. At first, the green giant said that he had a feeling that he had seen this creature before, but did not go into it because he decided to start a battle with his squad. Getting down to the ground, the goblin turned to the boy and emphasized that he must tell the commander what he was going to do here. And after that, he shouted to his soldiers to start attacking, and in no case should any of them retreat, but fight to the very end. After completing the first clash, Doros retreated to a certain distance, gained some momentum, caught his breath, and began to run again, urging his soldiers to do the same. Watching the battle, Choi began to worry that at this rate, his opponent would be able to destroy the monster and stay alive. And all because Doros's subordinates take all the blows and he only attacks, and because of this, the battle is gaining momentum that the young man did not expect. And the green giant, despite his great weight, fought quite skillfully, and it was not obvious that he was suffering from it. During the next preparation for the attack, he suddenly heard one of the goblins approaching from behind and loudly calling out to him to attract his attention. And he managed to do so after shouting that another monster had appeared and was already moving right behind him to the clearing where the battle was taking place. Choi was confused that he had not taken into account the fact that this big worm would perceive this battle as a division of territory and would run here to take some part of it. Doros saw his opponents and assessed the situation, so he quickly raised his hand up and shouted that they would not be able to cope here and said that they needed to retreat. Rachel flew up to Choi and asked what they would do in this case, because they simply could not let the Green Goblin go home. Gritting his teeth, the guy realized that he had no choice but to use his last chance to get rid of Doros today. So, having gained acceleration and concentrated energy and magic in both hands, the young man attacked the battalion commander in order to prevent him from escaping. But as soon as he was close to the giant's face, he told him to immediately cancel his order to retreat and said that everyone had to fight to the last. And just a second later, Doros repeated all these words to his soldiers, who did not yet understand what they needed to do, run away or stay. After all this, the giant began to fall on his back, thinking that his whole life was ruined, and all because he was betrayed by a man. In the last moments, the commander gathered all his strength and shouted that no bug dared to treat him like that, so he promised that he would take revenge for that day. Rising up, Doros hovered in the sky, saying that he was ready to risk everything he had to destroy his traitor right here and now, without putting it off for later. Choi froze in his tracks as he was shocked by what he saw, and Rachel was equally surprised, but she managed to tell the guy to run away immediately. However, it was too late to do so because an explosion occurred next to the boy, which first lifted him off the ground and then abruptly threw him to the side. Once on the ground, the young man began to look around, thinking that he had almost just died, and all because he did not know about the skills of his opponent. The adult standing a few meters away called Choi by name in an angry tone and told him that he would tear him to pieces and that he would do it while he was still alive. After hearing this threat, the boy smiled slightly and realized that it was really a danger for him, so he began to look for the animal named Bobo. Rachel said that the dog was attacked by one of the monsters, so he was now engaged in destroying it to make it leave him alone. As he continued to kneel on the ground, the young man realized that he would have to fight Doros alone, and this was not part of the plan. Rising to his feet, Choi looked at his opponent and noticed that the technique he was using was clearly having a bad effect on his general condition. Therefore, the guy decided to buy himself some time and turned to the right and began to run quickly in the direction where he guessed there should be more monsters. A personal fairy was flying alongside him, guiding his movement a little bit because she also spent a lot of time memorizing a map of all of the important places. Doros started running after the young man, and he realized something and asked if the man was thinking of escaping because it was a very bad plan. The giant green goblin, despite his weight, gained such a speed that it was hard to imagine that he was capable of such a thing. However, Choi was not afraid of this because he had already made a new plan for himself and was leading his opponent to a place where several dozen monsters were to gather. Every minute, it became more noticeable that Doros was getting worse because he had already started coughing up blood, but he did not pay attention to it because he was focused on revenge. After all, he wanted to destroy his offender at any cost today, and even if he himself died, he would still be able to do it with dignity. But suddenly the commander stopped in his tracks as the blood began to flow down his arms, and looking at this, he began to assume that he had spent a lot of his energy in vain. Therefore, turning in the opposite direction, he began to simply run away from Choi, who stopped in place and did not understand anything and shouted in the wake and asked where he was going. The green creature replied without stopping that he himself was not pleased to say this, but still said that he would definitely return for the boy as soon as he regained his strength. Without turning his head, the battalion commander continued to run, adding that he does not forget such betrayals and humiliation, so at some point he will come for revenge. However, the boy was not ready to let him go so easily today, so he jumped high and flew at the giant from the mountain, saying that it was not yet time to return home. Doros saw this attack and called his opponent a stupid person who had imagined that he could defeat him just like that with his bare hand. At this time, Hemis arrived quickly at the scene because she heard strange screams and noise and at first could not understand what was happening because everything was covered in dust after the explosion. Choi himself flew a few meters to the side and landed with his body hitting a tree trunk, which gave him a severe headache. Doros, in turn, ran up to Hemis, grabbed her, and began to beg her to save him from death, saying that he had not yet lost, and that this was definitely not the end of the battle. However, the girl definitely did not live up to his expectations, because instead of helping him, she climbed up high above him and angrily ordered him to shut his mouth. Then the young lady illuminated her eyes with a red light and emphasized that the battalion commander was very stupid to be so easily deceived by an ordinary person. Making a small pause, Hemis added that her whole body shuddered at the fact that such personalities as Doral's held such a large leadership position in her domain. Choi decided to take advantage of this pause, so he quickly got to his feet, gained a stance, and then began to move on his opponent to take his life. And literally, in a minute, the young man managed to do what he had planned, namely the destruction of the battalion commander during today's hunt. Hemis saw this ending and was surprised at first, but then called the boy with her because she thought they had something to discuss. As soon as they moved to the lady's office, she immediately asked what was going on in her husband's mind since he decided to do all this. After a short pause, the commander raised his index finger up and said that using his words against him was a very cunning and thoughtful plan. After a second, Hemis added that she didn't like it, but in this situation, Choi really shows good results as soon as the day comes when the condition is to be fulfilled. The guy put his hands behind his back and smiled broadly with pleasure, but the woman added that next time, he would definitely not win. And she began to explain that if he created any problems for her again, or used any insidious plans, it would not end well for him. After the meeting with the commander, Choi went to his room and lay down on the floor, with his arms and legs spread out, and said out loud that today was the day he almost died. Then he and Rachel began to discuss everything that had happened, because they did not even expect Doros to take the strength to fight back. Bobo even intervened in the conversation, barking something in his own way, and the boy nodded to him, emphasizing that the animal also had a hard time with the monsters. Then Choi hugged the dog and started stroking it, because it was the kind of action that brought pleasure to the animal, and it relaxed because it felt safe with these men. Suddenly, the fairy said that she even felt sorry for Doros, because the boy took all the points when he struck the last blows during the hunt. The young man heard this and covered his face with his hand and said that he was sorry too, but just a second later you could hear him covering his sarcastic smile with his hand. When he finished laughing, Choi opened the system window to see how his level had risen after the events that had happened to him today. Looking at the numbers, he was satisfied with their value, but there was something that alarmed him because there were some squares and several question marks. Wow. So he assumed that it could be some kind of breakdown in the system, and when Rachel heard this, she put her hands to her sides and emphasized that this could not be the case in the hero's system. Having spoken, the girl took her glasses and said that there was no time to talk in vain because it was necessary to determine the strength of the young man and celebrate his 48th level. In order to measure the strength, the young lady looked at Choi through his glasses and in a few seconds happily announced that his strength now reached 13,000. Hearing this value, the guy began to smile broadly, emphasizing that he had improved quite a bit, because yesterday he was powerless against an ordinary goblin, and today he had such results. Rachel, looking around, said that she was waiting for a similar moment a while ago and had prepared a certain gift to present. And just a minute later, the young lady was holding a large wooden glass with a drink in her hands, saying that she wished to always remain as strong as she was. At this time, events were happening in the Empire of Divine Magic that forced all the main people to act, even though they had no great desire to disturb their peace. The next morning, as Choi bandaged his arm with an elastic bandage, he thought about visiting the saint today because he still had some questions. However, he did not come to a final decision because his thoughts were interrupted by Reborn, who came to the training ground and said that the boy had arrived early today. The young man got to his feet and simply said hello, and the giant smiled and congratulated his student on the fact that he had defeated Doros himself in the battle. As soon as the conversation turned to this battle, Choi began to approach his mentor because he wanted to ask him something because it did not allow him to live normally. So the guy asked if the interlocutor knew the technique of raising Reborn, and raising his hand to his chin, he replied that it was an ancient, informal fighting style. The young man asked for some explanation for better understanding, and the coach said that usually the fight is divided into two types, and the first is formal, which involves movement. But there is also a second one, called informal, which is based on changing the body or weapon at the moment when the creature realizes that there is nothing else he can do. Then the giant folded his arms across his chest and said that there are fewer varieties of the second type than the first because the informal technique is passed down from generation to generation in a very secretive way. After listening to this story, Choi closed his eyes and thought that he finally understood the difference between attacking skills and reinforcement techniques. Reborn continued to say that boosting is an ancient skill, and therefore any demon who possesses ki energy is able to master this technique for his development. These words made the young man think about whether he could master this technique, and looking at his body, he remembered that there was some demonic ki inside him. The coach said that it could not be called that because this energy accidentally got into his body, and then the young man said that he should try and emphasize that just in case they had saints to save him. The interlocutor paused for a moment and said that he did not think and did not support this idea because there was no need to bring himself to a bad state. The young man realized that Reborn wanted to hush things up, so he jumped up to the other man, grabbed his leg, and began to loudly beg him to try what they were talking about. The coach could not withstand this pressure, so he decided to agree to the request, but before doing anything, he would still do some explanatory work. At this time, in the Divine Empire in the underground prison, the family leader came to see one of the prisoners to see if he was awake or not. As soon as the young man Gafeng looked up, he realized that everything that had happened to him was because of his father, so he wondered why he had come to him now. The gray-haired gentleman smiled slightly and replied that he decided to give the blonde a chance to make amends, since in the end everyone is equal before God. Spitting out blood, the young man asked a question to find out what he needed to do to fix the situation. And the visitor did not hesitate to answer, but immediately said in a serious tone that the guy should take the life that he had to bring here in a few weeks. Giffen was very surprised by this order, because the task had changed so drastically. Because last time he had to bring the young lady alive, and now he had to take her life. The older man said that the young man did not need to know the whole truth, so he did not insist on explanations, but said that he could not return to the place where there was a demon slayer. The father smiled lightly and said that his son did not have to worry about it, because he would have 4 knights with him, and the demon fighter would not be there. And finally, the man added that Giffen should prepare himself so that this time he would not lose, because the path to glory does not tolerate defeats, no matter what they are. At this time, Choi was already lying on the ground writhing from the pain that pierced his entire body, and a saint was already there to help him. The young lady was excited by the situation and began to reproach the trainer and the student for using a special technique that only a demon can master. Reborn began to say that Choi had told him that he felt fine and that since a lot of time had passed, there should have been almost no ki energy left in his body. After listening to this explanation, the saint continued to emphasize angrily that they should not have done this because they did not fully understand the essence of it. And after calming down a bit, the lady said that during the first rescue, she had blocked the demonic energy so that it would not harm the young man. And this time, they took her and released her, thinking that they could take control, but everything did not happen as the men decided, so they have this result. Therefore, taking the victim by the hand, the saint said that since it was too late to restrain this energy, she would try to help the boy accept it. Then, she told in detail what Reborn would do, and after listening carefully, he asked if it was possible to do it, and if it would help Choi somehow. The interlocutor replied that she did not know the answer to these questions because she had never had to do this before, as it had never happened in her experience. After a short pause, the saint said that, of course, there is an option that everything will not go according to her plan, but other options lead to even worse results than it is now. So she took the young man's hand even more firmly, and using her strength and knowledge, said that she would try to do her best. A few hours later, Choi woke up in bed, and you could immediately see the shock in his eyes because he did not understand how he got here and what happened to him. He got up and began to hold his head, thinking aloud that he had a feeling that he had missed something very important. And right at that moment, Rachel and Bobo jumped on him, telling him that he had finally woken up because he had been unconscious for 3 days. However, Choi could not remember what had happened at all. The only thing he remembered was that he wanted to level up and then just a blackout. Opening the system window, the young man was shocked to see a section called Demonic Energy, but before he could see anything, Hemis came to visit him with Radron. The boy wanted to quickly go up to greet the commander, but she told him not to because he was not in the best condition. Then the girl said that Radron told her that the boy tried to use demonic energy as an ordinary person. After a short pause, the young lady smiled broadly and asked why Choi hadn't shared this news with her, since it was such a fun event. When she finished laughing, Hemis said that she had helped the boy survive and recover from the accident, and had used all her strength and knowledge to do so. Then the woman licked her sharp nail and said that the ending was not very happy, so this time she was ready to help him to continue his action. And she explained that he was like her personal aunt, whose actions are very fun and interesting to watch, especially when something comes to his mind. Then the commander used her dark energy to tell Choi to take it as an honor, but he could not stand the influx and just flew away. Redron did not expect such a development of events, so he was frightened and asked the young lady for an explanation. But she did not explain anything, only said that the boy would wake up healthy after sleeping. She turned to the exit and said that they could return to the office for now because she had received a message from the Demon King himself. A few days passed, and Choi was indeed feeling better and better every day, and all because the saint often came to him for treatment. Receiving thanks for her work, the girl said that she didn't need to say that, because in the end it was his strong desire to live that kept him alive. Rubbing his head, the young man could not understand whether he had upset the girl or what had happened at all, and she told him that today was the last day of his treatment. Choi was still worried about what the saint was telling him, but he could not interpret everything correctly, so he decided to wait for a time when she could confide in him better and explain. That same evening, he came to his coach to ask him to teach him how to use and control his dark energy. The giant did not immediately agree to this request because he had already barely survived the recent events, and now the guy wants to drag him into some kind of adventure again. Besides, he had a bad feeling about the fact that Hemis had left the palace to go to a meeting at the Demon King's castle. Immersed in his thoughts, Redron did not react to the words of his guest, so he turned to him angrily in order to attract attention. So as soon as he looked at him again, Choi emphasized that the coach had been busy lately and asked if he needed any help. The giant smilingly said that he was fine now, and that the commander would be back soon, because this year she was called to a meeting earlier than in the past. And because of this, the interlocutor said that the guy should not worry about him in vain, but rather concentrate his attention and energy on developing himself. This is because Choi is getting stronger and stronger every day, and his body needs to develop well thanks to the dark mana that is inside him. Therefore, he first needs to learn how to control it in order to grow, and then learn how to use it in various techniques. Suddenly, in an instant, Redron jumped to his feet and said that he felt some kind of divine power, and it did not belong to a saint, so he went in search of the offender. At this time, Giffen and 3 soldiers made their way to the palace grounds, and even they were surprised that they had done it so easily. One of the warriors, who was the first to walk, said that perhaps they were able to do so because there was no demon soul destroyer on the ground. The blond man asked his colleagues to speak a little quieter because even though the commander is not here, there is still one creature in this place that is nicknamed the Red Nightmare because of what it can do. And as soon as the young man said this, Redron appeared on their way, folded his arms across his chest, and asked how these uninvited guests knew that Mrs. Hemis was not there. The group of enemies, seeing this giant in front of them, began to panic a little and pull out their weapons, but Giffen was surprisingly calm and asked them not to panic. After a short pause, the guy gave an order to everyone to split up and simultaneously deal with the Red Nightmare and take the saint for themselves. Hearing this, Redron realized that these people had come for the blonde, and from this place, her room was very close, especially if they moved quickly. The giant realized that he could destroy these attackers quickly enough, but there was a certain problem that they decided to split up. Suddenly, these thoughts were interrupted by Choi's voice running behind him, saying that he had come to the rescue. At first, the coach scolded him for putting himself in danger, but then he quietly thanked him and asked him to go to the saint and take her to a safe place because these people had come here to kidnap her. Finally, Radron gave the young man a necklace to use as evidence when he assembled high-level officers to respond to the situation. Having received the necessary order, Choi turned toward the saint's room and began to run. Giffen saw this and asked his men to stop the young man. At this time, The red giant was running toward the blonde with his fist and said that he would not be able to take the girl without the permission of the commander of the Hemis. Choi, not paying attention to what was happening around him, continued to move in the direction he needed because he had an equally important task ahead of him. And just at this inopportune moment, a notification from the system appears that the hero has a new task, and it is to save and protect the saint. After reading all the conditions, the young man saw a large number of rewards given for successful completion, and he could not understand why there was such a huge number. However, there was no time to look into it further, so Choi kicked in the door to the blonde's room and shouted loudly that they needed to get out of here immediately because they were under attack. The young lady asked for an explanation, but the guy couldn't tell her anything because he didn't know, only that it was the same attackers as last time. While these two were trying to understand what was happening, a battle was already taking place near the door of the room between the guards and those who came to kidnap the girl. One of the goblins turned to Choi and told him to take the saint and run away from here immediately because it was not known whether they would be able to resist these enemies. The young man wanted to take her hand, but the woman did not want to do so and resisted. But the young man grabbed her by the waist and threw her over his shoulder and began to run with her. At this time, in the conference room at the headquarters of the 3rd Corps of the Demon King's army, Roigo was expressing his surprise at Doros's loss. Hemis listened calmly and said that she was no longer interested in this topic because she was only thinking about making sure that everything was fine in the palace in her absence. At this point, Roigo said that they had already discussed all the important topics and issues, so it was time to end the meeting in order not to waste time. And as soon as he said that, a green goblin abruptly opened the door to the office and addressed the commander, saying that he had an urgent report. The gentleman put his feet on the table and said to tell everything immediately, and his subordinate said that the chef had arrived, holding Mr. Radron's necklace. After a second pause, the goblin added that Choi said that the palace was attacked by people who wanted to take the saint, and that's why Redron sent him and the girl to a safe place. After these words, the commander quickly stood up and went out to the guests so that they could personally explain to him what was really happening in the castle where they lived. The young man immediately began the story with the fact that Redron felt the divine energy, and when he went out into the corridor, he met people who came to destroy the saint. The interlocutor could not understand why people would take the life of their own colleague, but the gentleman said out loud that the young man should calm down and speak a little slower. However, it was not possible to have a calm conversation because those who wanted to kill the saint came here, so Roigo ordered his men to light the signal lights. But after the words were said, the gentleman could not believe what was happening because he still had no explanation as to why people wanted to destroy their own family member. However, there was not much time to think because a big battle was starting to unfold right in front of his eyes, and he had to intervene to keep his own people alive. At this time, Giffen saw with his own eyes how one of his colleagues died, and for some reason he was not upset at all. But on the contrary, opening his mouth wide, he began to smile and say something to himself. Watching the blonde man, Redron realized that the attacker was really strong because this man was somewhere on the level of a unit commander. While the giant was giving some information, the attacker sneeringly emphasized that the red nightmare everyone was so afraid of was just a demon. Coach Choi angrily asked why the young man was having so much fun since he knew he was going to lose, but he continued to laugh, saying that he was not afraid to be here when Hemis was not there. Raising his sword, the boy said that he just needed to stall for time to wait for the moment when his partners would deal with all the goblins. Hearing this answer, Redron wondered how much information had leaked about this place, because Geffen knew that Hemis was not here now, and also knew about the power that filled the palace. However, the giant did not want to waste time on talk, and said that he needed to get to the battle to get it over with. The blonde continued to smile to himself because he was confident in his victory, and spoke out loud to see how his opponent would react. Of course, these words made Redron very angry, so he highlighted his eyes in red to demonstrate how he felt. At this time, after repelling the attack, one of the attackers said that he did not even know or hear that a hero who is developing quite rapidly appeared in the army of the Demon King. Choi said that the enemies had definitely lost because in a matter of seconds, the soldiers who were in the palace would be here, and then no one would leave alive. Without waiting for any response from the enemy, the hero continued to say that he should surrender, because no matter how strong he was, he would not be able to resist the whole army. However, the enemy was still behaving very confidently, so he smiled mysteriously and asked Choi if he was sure that they had already lost this battle. At this time, standing a little to the side, Roigo tried to understand when exactly Choi was able to master the ray-drawn technique, because thanks to his help, he was able to destroy one attacker. Suddenly, something started to happen that made Roigo quite surprised, because the one who died was somehow able to set his own body on fire with the help of a spell. But another enemy who stood in front of Choi and the saint said that an ordinary person would not be able to escape the fire that was spreading around them. After a short pause, the enemy added that even high-level demons cannot always resist this fire, so he advised Choi to give him the saint. However, the guy was in no hurry to do so. He first wanted to hear the answer, why people wanted to take this girl's life, because she was on their side. Hearing this, the attacker wanted to say that the young lady has not been on their side for a long time, especially when analyzing recent events. This can be confirmed. Therefore, it was at this moment that the saint decided to intervene in the conversation and tearfully told Choi that the Holy Empire had long since abandoned God. The young man gritted his teeth and asked for an explanation, and the young lady briefly replied that all these people needed was a puppet who would silently obey orders. And it doesn't matter whether she is a real saint or not, it is important for them to get their own benefit in order to confront this world, forgetting about the scriptures. The attacker decided that it was time to finish with these tearful stories and said that he would give the hero 10 seconds to prepare for the fight. And when he started counting down from the number 10, Choi squinted his eyes and wondered how long he would be able to fight this attacker in order to restrain him. Therefore, he made a cardinal decision, which the saint guessed and asked him not to use dark magic because his body could not withstand it. Withstanding all the pain that pierced his body, the guy said that they would all die here anyway, so he had to try to do at least something to save them. While applying the dark energy, Choi had a memory of training with Reborn, who was constantly telling him how to go through the stages. Although he remembered perfectly well that without controlling the current stage, he could not move on to another, this time he decided to do as he pleased. At some point, the guy felt that his heart was going to break, and he had a feeling that every cell in his body was asking him to stop it. Rachel, who was able to get to her subordinate, was shocked to say the least because she did not want the young man to use dark energy, because it could harm him. Before the last stage, Choi told himself to concentrate and not to listen to anyone, and when he passed it, he asked the fairy to give him a buff and not to stop his action. At this time, the opponent simply watched what was happening, and when it was over, he emphasized that Choi was not an ordinary hero. He was someone who knew how to use the technique of boosting. During the first encounter, the enemy said that the guy would not be able to hold out for long in this state because his body had already darkened from the effects of dark energy. Repelling the attack, the brazen enemy added that he just needed to wait until the active phase was over and then do everything to win. However, what happened next made the enemy quite surprised, as his opponent was able to break through his punch with just one hand movement. After that, Choi was able to strike the attacker in the chest, and the latter, stepping back a little, said that he had never seen anything like it. Therefore, having come to his senses, he began to address the man, emphasizing that he should be ashamed of himself for succumbing to the influence of demons. However, the young man did not care about all these reproaches because he already felt that he was on the verge of doing it, but he could not stop because then everything would end badly for them. That's why he didn't let himself and his men relax in order to continue fighting and repelling the attack. Choi felt that his body was already on the verge of collapse, and even if he stopped, it would not be possible to restore it. So he decided to go all the way since there was no other option. The saint, having seen what was happening to her savior, was very worried about him and the state he was in. Therefore, folding her arms as if in prayer, she began to mentally appeal to God to prevent anything bad from happening to this man. At that time, Choi was already preparing for the next attack in order to finally end all this chaos that unfolded around him and have a normal rest. And right now, he decided to use all the techniques he knew in order to finally defeat this impudent young man who came to destroy the saint. Although there was no reason to do so at all, and it is not yet clear why these people are following the leader's order, which seems to be just nonsense. During the next attack, the enemy noticed that his opponent was using not only 2 different attacks to destroy him, but he also changed them a little. And as soon as the guy came to this conclusion, Choi struck him so hard that he fell to the ground and there was a small burst of energy and light. Then the saint ran up to her savior and knelt down beside him and began to support him, while she was very worried about his condition. Looking closely at his face, she noticed that he was barely breathing and asked him to hold on, and she would try to help him as much as she could. Suddenly, the injured attacker stood up sharply and, holding a sword in his hand, shouted loudly, emphasizing that he had underestimated his opponent. After that, the guy paused for a moment and added that if Choi managed to survive, he would become a real threat to the entire empire. And as soon as the enemy wanted to strike Choi, Reborn appeared on the horizon, apologizing for the delay and then destroying the one who had invaded them. Approaching the young man, the giant was upset that he was in such a state and asked if the saint could save him, and she replied that she would try to do so. And leaning into the young man's hand, the girl quietly addressed him and asked him not to leave her here because his time had not yet come. At this time, Hemis, who had been at the meeting for 5 days, did not even suspect anything, but she still wanted to go home. That's why she had been expressing her dissatisfaction lately, and now it was about the cakes that were brought to her for a snack. The person sitting next to her, who was the commander of the 4th Corps of the Demon Army, told her not to make a show of it and to eat what she was given. Hemis said that she did not like this kind of communication and could have already destroyed the young lady, but could not do it because of the ban on dueling between members of the army. Suddenly, one of the palace's employees interrupted this unpleasant conversation and said that the Hemis palace had been attacked and many of their demons had been killed. The young lady listened carefully and began to suspect something, emphasizing that the meeting to which she was invited suddenly decided to hold earlier, and as soon as she left the palace, people attacked. And after cutting off a piece of cake, the girl smilingly turned to her interlocutor and said that there was some incredible coincidence. At this time, Choi woke up again in his bed, and this time he immediately began to rejoice because he could see everything around him. Suddenly a fairy attacked him and began to reproach him by his hair for scaring her so much, but he was able to survive again. After that, the guy asked her to remind him of everything, and the girl took out a notebook and not only told him, but also showed him the sketches she had created on her own. And Choi, in turn, listened quietly to understand whether everything went better this time or whether he was still at the same level. Finally, Rachel said that after the incident, Reborn and the Saint took turns at his bedside to make sure that there was always someone there. Then the fairy emphasized that she and Bobo also looked after him at every opportunity because they were also very worried about his condition. Suddenly, the interlocutor began to shout sharply, emphasizing that this rescue was a real miracle, so the young man should not do such things in the future. Choi, having heard everything, raised his index finger to Rachel's level, and the girl shrank back and asked if he really wanted to beat her again. However, he didn't even think of that, so he lightly patted her head and smiled and apologized for making her worry. Several hours had passed since Choi woke up, and Hemis and Reborn came to him and began to reproach him for his rash act. The young man simply could not listen to this monologue because the coach was telling him the same thing in a circle to make him finally understand. Hemis, who was primarily occupied with Bobo, asked the giant to stop because she was getting bored. Choi asked the commander how her meeting went, but she replied that she had run away from there early because she found out that terrible things were happening in her house. Continuing to hug her pet, Hemis emphasized with a slight smile that the venerable Demon King was in a bit of a shock. All those present did not understand what this statement meant, and the young lady did not want to explain anything and said that it was not so important. And a second later, she added that although she planned to share her mana with Choi, she could not even think that a person at the level of a company commander would be able to use it as his own. After all this, the young lady had a flashback to a meeting with the Demon King, where they discussed when he first invaded this world. And it was at that moment that he said that he was able to unite his efforts, even though he had tried many times before, and nothing had worked out well. Hemis then constantly followed the will of the demon because she believed that he was trying to protect himself in this way and therefore could protect her as well. Listening to this monologue, the interlocutor could not understand why this girl was telling him this, so he just sat in his chair and remained silent. Hemis saw the misunderstanding in her master's eyes and made a softer expression, and said that the Demon King had been crossing the line a bit lately. It was only after these words that the master spoke up and said that this phrase sounded somehow arrogant, and also it was presented as if the girl was going to start a riot. After a short pause, the man said that a long life had made a primitive creature out of the young lady, and the interlocutor did not want to continue the conversation, so she said that she would rather leave the office. After taking a few steps, Hemis stopped abruptly and told the man to think carefully about his words, because she thought that she was not the one who had become boring. After finishing her memories, the girl and her best friend left Bobo's house, and as soon as they got outside, Hemis greeted Reborn. The giant did not understand who was greeting him, and the young lady explained that it was time for him to take a higher position because he himself had become a human hero. Reborn listened carefully, smiled broadly, and emphasized that he appreciated her words, but in his opinion it was not the right time for him to change his position. The interlocutor asked why he thought so, and the giant gave an honest answer that one part of him still wants to watch Choi grow up. But there is another side that wants to continue training with Hemis because he still has a lot to learn in order to change his level and position. The girl raised her hands in the air and decided that there was no need to continue this conversation. So she said that now she had to clean up the mess after the invasion. And just a minute later, the young lady added that it was necessary to hold a tournament because all the creatures here were already lazy since this castle was far from the front. The next morning, Choi opened the system window to see what had changed and what could be added to the hero's store for purchase. Looking closely at the goods, the young man realized that many different things had been added but he did not yet understand whether he wanted to buy anything and whether he needed anything at all. However, in a few minutes he noticed that some things had many different options, and that is what attracted him to the objects at the moment. So he decided to start by improving the force meter, as it is the device he uses most often out of all of them. Next, Choi noticed a new feature called Skill and Magic Creation, and after reading a brief description, he realized that it should be used with special insurance. But he was so curious that he clicked on the function without thinking for a long time, and in a few minutes something happened, and he thought that he had already created a skill of his own. However, in order for a certain entry to be made in the system, he needed to demonstrate this skill, so as soon as he did, the necessary process began. After that, the guy began to carefully study each notification in order to understand how it all works, in order to use everything faster in the future. Then Choi began to rejoice because his story was finally starting to turn into a normal rebirth story, and as soon as he thought about it, the system gave him a red notification. It said that the attempt to create a skill had failed and suggested choosing another way. The young man was upset because he did not understand why it didn't work, because he did everything according to the instruction. And then Rachel intervened and emphasized that the system does not seem to recognize users who use dark demon magic, and thus it protects the hero. The guy couldn't stop himself, so he grabbed his fairy and threw it aside, and at that very moment, the system gave a notification about a new task for the hero. A few hours later, Choi came to Radron and knelt down, loudly begging the coach to help him one last time so that he could continue to develop. The interlocutor folded his arms across his chest before expressing his decision and decided to clarify whether the young man really wanted to create his own personal skill. The young man immediately gave an affirmative answer and began to wait for an answer because he was very interested in this function, so he wanted to understand it. And in just a few minutes, the giant replied that he was ready to help, adding that he was going to work out with the young man for a couple of hours today anyway. After that, Redron turned sharply in the opposite direction and told Choi to follow him because they would start their training right now so as not to waste time. And from that moment on, the training began and continued for many, many hours without a single break for rest, and no one ate anything during this time. At the end of the day, Choi came home and just collapsed on the bed and didn't even move because he was so tired that he didn't have the strength to change his position. The next morning, he woke up and barely got to his feet and smiled with satisfaction because he had finally managed to complete the task and create his own skill. He slightly changed the martial art of Radron for himself because he is a person who needs to adapt everything to his strength and energy. A few days later, a large-scale tournament was held where one commander of the 1st Battalion and one commander of the 13th Regiment were to be chosen based on the results. The host of this event was a goblin who cheerfully reported into the microphone that this time the battles would be different from those that were once during the usual tournament. Then the creature added that the first stage, which will begin in just an hour, is called Oops, the Knife Slipped, and everyone present listened attentively to this information. Choi, who was one of the last to arrive, was smiling mysteriously, as if he was trying to demonstrate that he was also a worthy opponent for all participants. The guy folded his arms across his chest and continued to behave very confidently, while he tried to hear everything in detail and think about his further action. A red-haired young lady came into the room where Choi was preparing for the first stage of the tournament and put her hands at her sides and said that she had been watching him and realized that he was an ordinary person. Then she came up close to the young man and looked him in the eye and emphasized that at first glance he was an ordinary hero, but for some reason she felt a flow of dark mana from him. The young man did not have time to answer because at that moment, Reedrun was interrupting the conversation, first apologizing and then asking the girl to step aside. Then the giant explained that he had come on a special assignment to the chef, which Hemis herself had instructed him to pass on to the young man. At first, the girl wanted to ask about everything in more detail, but then realized that it was better for her to leave the place because she was politely asked to do so. However, when she was walking to the exit, she came to a certain conclusion that this giant Reedron kept an ordinary man next to him as a commander and not as food. And this made it even more interesting for her because she had never met such a redhead in her life, so she was eager to see what would happen next. As soon as Henna came out, the coach told Choi that this lady came by order of the Demon King to watch the tournament, but Hemis is sure that there is something more behind it, so the young man should stay away from the girl. After listening carefully, the young man scratched his head and said that he understood everything, after which he asked a question to find out what order the commander had given him. And Reedron said that the student had to become the 8th finalist of the tournament, and if he did not, he would be sent to the 2nd building as a research material. And now it was time for the first stage, where they just had to get to the final, and the host emphasized that if one of the participants was killed, there would be no punishment for it. Many people were happy about this news, but at the same time, they were wary, because it is not known what to expect from the creatures that will be around for a few minutes. Therefore, as soon as the order to start the stage was announced, all participants immediately rushed towards the finish line in order not to lose the opportunity to win. However, the run was not ordinary, because at every step there were obstacles and explosions that prevented Choi from running, so he turned to Rachel to tell him what was happening ahead. And in a minute, it turned out that in addition to the obstacles, one of the participants who looked like a goat was running next to the guy and trying to strike him to destroy him. The first attacks the guy managed to repel or avoid quite successfully because he was warned about them by a personal fairy who tried to keep an eye on everything at the same time. The creature in the form of a goat was not very upset because it thought that it would be able to deliver a good blow, so now it decided to just laugh at the guy. Choi, of course, did not like this attitude because he had already felt it from several participants, so he began to speak out sharply to be treated with dignity. However, they did not even listen to him. They just decided to attack the guy in turn in order to get rid of him at the initial stage of the tournament. And after a small fight, the goat ran forward and turned to Choi and shouted that he should try to catch up with him, of course, if he could. The guy began to catch up with him, loudly calling him names, and as soon as he calmed down, he asked Rachel to tell him what was happening ahead. As soon as the young lady said that the young man had overtaken 76 participants and had 24 more to go, Choi was stabbed in the back by a goblin. And just at that moment, a memory came to mind when Reed Run told his student that the fighting skills he had learned were completely incompatible with the human body. And all because the giant developed and created these skills and techniques specifically for demons and did not take into account the fact that people would someday use them. And so, Reedran said that the boy would need to invent his own skills that he could adapt specifically to his strength and energy that he had. And over time, he really managed to create something of his own, and all this happened thanks to the merger of the dark mana that Hemis gave him and the magical power of people. This made Choi very happy and excited because he was finally able to do something that could help him in the future during various battles. For the first few days, he was just perfecting and testing this skill so that he could quickly use it at the right time. And as soon as he began to think about the name, he emphasized that for a long time, the color of the nobility was purple, like his skill, so he decided to call it nobility. And returning his thoughts to the present moment, Choi was able to apply his skill in time, in which he opened the first form of the king's step in order to land successfully. And as soon as he succeeded, the young man went forward, despite those who tripped him up, because 95 participants had already reached the finish line. It turns out that there are only 5 last places left, so the guy has to make every effort to be among these last 5 to move on to the next stage. The goat, who noticed his human rival, was shocked by how he managed to quickly catch up with him, but the young man decided to strike someone, and that someone was the goat. And when he managed to realize his plan, the observer who stood at the finish line announced out loud that the last 2 finalists were Holgoth, that is, the goat, and Choi. Since they just flew over this important line, it took the guy a few seconds to understand the words from the tournament organizer. And when he understood everything, he began to smile with satisfaction, happy that he had succeeded. But for some reason, Holgoth was angry and threatened the boy. While the observer was trying to calm the goat down, the other organizers said that the second round would take place in 3 days, so the participants could leave for now. That same night, in the forest near the palace, a red-haired young woman met with Hemis to clarify whether she had really decided to fire someone during the tournament. At first, the interlocutor looked away and ignored the question, and the girl emphasized that they had not seen each other in person for a long time. Hannah decided to be honest and said that, to be precise, they had not seen each other for 97 years, 3 months, and 11 days. Motem, who is Hemis's family name, also came to this meeting, and as soon as he had the opportunity to speak, he asked if he could help his lady. The young lady explained that he had to take away the flags from all the participants, but he should not behave badly and should be gentle with the weak one. The red-haired girl was shocked to hear this clarification and said that before that, Hemis had decided to give a certain fact as an example in order to quarrel. And so she first asked why, in the opinion of the interlocutor, demons lose to people, and without waiting for an answer said herself, emphasizing that they fight too honestly. Because demons always try to solve everything by force, but if they lose, they have only one way out, death, and for their species this is a normal state of affairs. But humans are built differently, and if they are at a disadvantage they will refuse to fight, because humans are capable of cunning or playing the game off the battlefield. Then Hemis came closer to Henna and looked her in the eye and said that it was for these reasons that their king kept losing to a race that was several times weaker. Seeing the stupor on the red-haired girl's face, she raised her index finger and said that one of them needed to refresh their knowledge of what was happening around them. A few days later, All the participants of the second stage of the tournament were given the rules they had to familiarize themselves with so that no unforeseen situations would arise later. And as soon as everyone was divided into 4 teams, Choi noticed that among his partners, there was the same jerk who continued to behave arrogantly towards him. After a few hours of the second stage, they began to notice that they were quickly moving down in the standings, and it was not clear why because nothing had changed dramatically. But at some point, they noticed a large man in armor next to them, and Holgut did not hold back and started pointing at him, calling him a golden goblin. Choi was the first to realize that there was no need to fight this giant, so he took a step back and warned his teammate. However, they didn't listen to him and thus lost their flags. A red-haired lady watching this told Hemis that she was going a little overboard, that this motem was simply impossible to resist. The woman didn't know what to say, so she continued to watch in silence, and Choi, speaking to his colleagues, said that after his order they all had to attack this monster in metal protection. The guy especially addressed the goat because he should use his magic at the right moment to distract the attention of their enemy. After that, Motem continued to stand still, but a second later he noticed that another participant was flying at him and emphasized for himself that this was the first team to use a double attack. And so, grabbing his attacker by the throat, he said that it was a normal, slow, head-on attack and emphasized that the participant's dark mana was too weak to defeat him. Choi did not attach much importance to these words. Instead, he and the centipede were to attack in order to take the flags from the enemy behind his back. Motem managed to restrain each of them with different parts of his body, and he also managed to feel that the boy was using purple energy during the attack. The young man didn't want to answer anything because he saw that their time was running out, and he needed to act more radically, so he used a dark mana blast. And after that, the round immediately ended. The young man fell to the ground, and the metal enemy looked at him and could not understand whether he really wanted to self-destruct by exploding his magic. At that very moment, Choi opened his eyes and smiling broadly told the enemy to look back because there was a goat standing there and holding a red flag in its paws. As soon as Motem began to walk away from the scene, he emphasized that he definitely wanted to kill himself and explained that he had thought everything through before using the explosion. The young man then emphasized that their meeting was very bad, and therefore, demonstrating an obscene gesture with his fingers, he said that they should not meet again. When the warrior in armor came to Hemis, she asked him to tell her something about Choi, and he said that the boy uses dark mana and mixes it with human power. After a short pause, Motem added that this young man is talented and fast, courageous and intelligent, and in general he is better than many demons in this palace. The commander listened attentively, folded her arms across her chest, looked down and said that they needed to change something immediately because this was about to go too far. Then she turned her gaze to the window and said that in her opinion, everything would be even more fun later if they created the conditions for things to go wrong. In this divine empire, the leader of this family heard rumors that Gofeng had lost during his last task, and had lost his hero so terribly, humiliating himself. The interlocutor asked the gentleman a question in order to understand what the man's intentions were with the saint, since they had not yet returned or destroyed it. The older man looked at his subordinate and said that he did not care how popular this girl was because she was just a princess of a small country. After a short pause, the leader said that he had decided to deprive her of her saint status in order to eventually find a new candidate and control her. The man went on to say that after this meeting, the interlocutor should inform everyone that the former saint was in cahoots with the army of the Demon King, and that is why she was deposed. After giving this instruction, the gentleman sat back in his chair and asked what they knew about what Hemis was up to, since there was some chaos in her palace after the attack. The visitor said that it seems that the woman is remaking the army and creating a command structure, and she also aims to select the best officers through a tournament. Looking at the documents he was given, the leader asked if there was any way to prevent the woman from implementing her plan by creating a new army. The interlocutor replied that they had already offered the Demon King cooperation, but he refused, and it looked like everyone would have big problems because of his bad relationship with Hemis. Then the older man suggested using their hero in this situation, and immediately suggested the candidacy of Lord Kinley, who could adequately resist the fighter. The subordinate added that he had heard rumors that the traitor Henna was now in the Black Palace to watch the tournament hall. The leader was interested in this information because he was surprised that this person was there at such a time and assumed that the Demon King was no longer trying to side with Hemis. Then, after all the facts and information, the visitor wanted to suggest that the main gentleman cancel his mission or simply postpone it to a better time. However, the man did not even want to listen to this because he no longer had any desire to wait any longer to realize his plans and live in peace. He explained that evil exists only so that good can oppose it, and sow it as best as possible, so that all their people can become more believers. The gray-haired gentleman realized that up to this point, they had been cooperating with the Demon King and thus controlling the course of the war, but when the demons began to improve, it would be difficult to restrain them. Therefore, he asked his interlocutor if the spy was telling the truth about the fact that the venue for the third stage of the tournament had changed at the last minute. The visitor immediately gave an affirmative answer because there was no point in hiding it, as the leader had somehow gotten the news without him. Seeing the place on the map, the leader told his subordinate to immediately summon the heroes to take advantage of the opportunity to test the abilities of the tournament participants. At this time, Choi came to his room and opened the system window to study the information about his skills and found out that he currently had 5 of them. He spoke about all his results out loud, and Rachel, who was nearby, emphasized that the guy was making quite a good progress. As soon as he wanted to open the hero shop to see if there were any new items, someone behind him whispered a few words in his ear. This scared Choi. He jumped to the side and saw the commander of the 4th Corps stammering in front of him and addressed him cautiously. The girl put her hands to her sides and said that the young man was very noisy, but then turned the conversation to find out how many hero points the young man had. After telling the number, the boy lightly smiled and turned to the girl to tell him what it was better to buy in a store at his level. The interlocutor was in no hurry to give any tips just like that, so she put forward the condition that if she advises him something, he will answer all the questions she asks him. Having received a positive answer, the young lady looked at everything Choi had and advised him to buy a pocket extension because for the price it was a very good thing. The guy continued to sit on the floor and was not satisfied with this advice because this feature will open only at the next level and not now. The redhead did not react to these words. She immediately began to ask her questions, and with the help of the first one, she found out that the guy was definitely a hero. After that, she asked what he was doing in the demon army, because it was not the best place for him, and the young man smiled broadly and said that it was an accident. And with the third question, the red-haired woman tried to find out how Choi managed to use both magic and dark energy, and the interlocutor told her that it somehow came naturally to him. Summing up all the answers she received, the girl did not believe it all, so out of anger, she swung her leg and struck the guy in the face. A few minutes later, she gave him a couple more blows and finally threw her legs over him and asked if he wanted to join the 4th Corps. Choi refused, and the red-haired woman asked him what the reason was for him to stay here, and the boy replied that Ms. Hemus was going to take his life. Hearing this answer, the interlocutor clarified whether there were any other reason, because it is not a serious intention to stay among such creatures, and the guy gave another honest answer without any hesitation, saying that he wanted to marry a blonde aristocrat and also wanted to become a father of 5 children. Hearing these words, the red-haired woman threw him to the floor and said that the young man could do whatever he wanted, but finally warned him that Hemus was not going to let him go. Before the guest left the room, the young man finally said that he felt as if he had become attached to the life here better than he had expected. The next day, after a little rest, Choi turned to Bobo before leaving and asked him to keep an eye on their room and that he would be back soon. Rachel, as usual, went with her subordinate to help him achieve his goal because although she was small in size, she was useful. Nestled among the guy's hair, she was happy to see that they had recently started to get along and no longer fought over the slightest thing. Just a few hours later, Choi found himself in the right place and even managed to level up a few levels by chasing and destroying monsters in the form of flowers. After catching another creature, the guy noticed a small purple ball above him, so he asked what it was and then realized that here he could read the rules of the 3rd stage of the tournament. While the young man was busy reading the rules, Rachel examined the ball and said that the magical skills of the Demon King's army were surprising because they could use such heavy spells. Having studied everything, the young man threw the monster in the form of a flower on his shoulder and said that they needed to get out of here immediately before anyone saw them. However, as soon as Choi took a few steps, a goat appeared on his way and threw an object at him, threatening that he would not escape this time. At this time, a lot of slaughtering creatures gathered near the teleportation portal, and the observer lying on a tree branch was not happy about the role he constantly gets. The goblin who was standing near the tree asked the gentleman not to talk like that anymore, because this is their only passage, and it simply cannot break, because then many will be stuck on the other side. The blonde observer put his hands under his head and looked up at the sky and said that no one would even think of teleporting to such a distant and remote place. Suddenly, the man felt someone step on the ground nearby, so he immediately jumped up and closed his eyes to see who came here and how many of them there were. In a few minutes, he managed to see a group of unknown people who did not smell like strong magic, so the observer began to think about what he should do in this case. Then he opened his eyes and continued to sit on a tree branch, emphasizing that he had a bad feeling, but that he was ready to wait. At this time, The goat's mouth simply did not close. He constantly uttered various phrases in order to scare his opponent and force him to surrender before the battle began. Choi, trying to listen carefully, put his hands to his sides, and when he had a chance to say something, he asked if the goat wanted to die right away. Suddenly, the creature fell to its knees and bowed its head to the ground and said that if the guy took his life, he would regret it very much. The young man immediately asked why he should regret anything, and the goat looked up and said that he had very valuable and useful information. The young man came closer and pretended that he was very interested to hear what the interlocutor knew, and that is why he started asking questions in order to find out. And the creature did not take long to say that Choi was the first on the list of deaths of all the demons participating in this tournament, but this information did not scare the boy at all. That's because he didn't see anyone but a goat next to him, but in just a minute, everything changed and a crowd began to move quickly towards him from the right side. At this time, in the hall of the large arena of the Dark Castle, Hamus and the red-haired girl watched as everyone simultaneously decided to open a hunt for Choi. Hamus said that she did not expect things to go this way, and so the interlocutor again emphasized that the young lady was showing her compassionate attitude towards the young man. At that very moment, an observer contacted the girls with the help of a magic ball and informed them that they had been attacked and the enemies were trying to break down the gate. The speaker went on to say that the enemy was a group of people armed with devices for covert attack, and it was not yet known how they had learned the exact location of the portal. Hamus listened carefully to everything and turned to Raidrun, and before she could say anything, he understood everything and said that he was already on his way. After that, the young lady began to hold her index finger on her chin, saying out loud that the people who attacked them had come here already prepared. Then the girl carefully put her hand on the rail, saying that there was a rat in their community who was ratting them out, and after saying that, Hamus sharply and strongly squeezed the rail. At this time, Choi managed to break away from the group of attackers, and hiding in the dense bushes, he wondered why the tournament organizers allowed this to happen. For a moment, the creatures did appear behind him, but they could not see the guy because he was hiding behind twigs, so they decided to wait for the next update. After the goblins moved away from him, the young man fell to the ground face down and told Rachel that he was very scared about whether he would survive at all. In order to support the interlocutor, the girl emphasized that he was quickly increasing his levels, so maybe he should really start a fight to continue this. Then the young lady suggested to see if there was anything useful in the store for heroes, and then the young man decided to look through it to find something. As soon as he called up the system window, the figure of a man dressed in a long, dark robe appeared right in front of his face and asked if he was a hero. Choi did not answer, but while he was sitting on the ground, he saw a large group of strangers in front of him who took off their hoods, and it turned out that they were people. The main one, who stood in front of everyone, had red hair and looked the guy straight in the eye and apologized for being late, and then said that his name was Andrew Taylor. After that, the system informed Choi that he must now survive at all costs because there is a group of heroes around him who are evil and have gone to the dark side. Therefore, the guy knelt down and began to bow to the guests, asking what exactly brought them to this area, and then thanking them for coming at all. As soon as the young man was asked what he was doing here, he replied with a mysterious smile that he was hunting demons in this forest today in order to destroy them. And when he said this, he quickly turned in the opposite direction and began to run away. Andrew drew his sword and shouted that they were ready to destroy the hero who was a traitor. Suddenly, the young man stopped abruptly because a group of demons were already coming at him from the other side, who also wanted him to die, and it turns out that he could be trapped. The goat was so focused on Choi that he didn't even notice at first that there was a group of ordinary people not far from him. The young man turned to his fellow tournament participants and asked them to sing the song of the third corps of the Demon King's army together, and as soon as he finished, he started singing. At first, all those present could not understand what exactly the guy wanted to achieve, so they just kept silent, but then they unconsciously began to sing along. And as long as such a large group was subjected to this singing, the system issued a notification that Choi's charisma and leadership were activated, and the morale of the allies was increased. And after just a few minutes of singing, the goat realized that they were all on the same side, or rather, in the army, so they had to destroy the group of people. As soon as all the participants of the tournament rushed to the enemies, the guy jumped up and thanked them for such a sacrifice and decided to run away while he had the opportunity. Watching the battle, the young man realized that his creatures would not be able to hold out for long, and then these heroes would be able to catch up with him somewhere nearby. However, suddenly, someone grabbed Choi by the scarf around his neck, and when he looked back, he saw an observer who said that people had destroyed the portal leading to the palace. He turned to the man and asked him what had happened to the guards, and the man replied that they must have died because he himself had barely managed to get out of there. The guy didn't really believe it, because there were fewer people than all of them, but the observer explained that all these enemies were at the level of battalion commander, and 3 of them were even regimental commanders. After listening carefully to this information, Choi asked a question to understand how they could get out of this place alive and received a clear and concise answer that there was no way they could do it. And a minute later, he added that it was very easy to track them both because the guy had a tracking spell on him and he held the highest position in the army of the Demon King. The young man was frightened by these facts, so he asked if it was possible to remove this magic from him at all. And the interlocutor said that it would take a lot of time, and they didn't have that much time. And just at that very moment, a purple ball that appeared in the air informed him that there was a certain threat, namely a demonic creature with a high level. At first, Choi started to panic a bit, but after thinking about it, he turned to the guard and wiping the cold sweat on his face said that he had an idea. At this time, a group of evil heroes managed to destroy all the demons that attacked them. So after that, they decided to go further to find the traitor hero. Listening to his feelings, Andrew said that their fugitive was not far from here in the western side, and he was no longer alone. It turns out that next to the guy is a large plant called Flocklade, a demonic creature, and it takes at least 1 hero-level fighter to destroy it. Arriving at the right place, a group of people stopped to watch the giant plant, and the leader even said that 2 of their enemies had attracted the attention of this monster. Choi was dressed as if he were a flower plant and had a big smile on his face because he had managed to come up with such a plan to save himself. Andrew looked up at the fugitive hero and said with a serious expression that he was ready to deal with him alone. Before the battle started, the guy said that he would take on the smaller mobs and his partner just needed to hold out while he was gone. The leader of the human group looked at the guy and asked him a question to see if he was planning to stall for time. The observer did not answer. Instead, he twisted the rope and just watched carefully what the enemy would do. A few minutes before this moment, Choi and the observer, dressed in flower costumes, discussed a plan that would make the best use of their strength. The whole plan was that the blonde man should keep running away from the enemy in order to wear him down, and at the same time he could use the demon beast as a shield against demonic attacks. At the same time, the boy would take turns dealing with the other attackers, and the main thing in this regard was not to go into a frontal attack because you could die. After a few minutes of running, Andrew fell to his knees and began to ask how much longer the opponent would just run away from him. The observer, looking at the tired hero from the mountain, thought that people usually fight like this, and in his opinion this approach belongs only to cowards. But despite this, they can buy time for themselves in this way to stay safe and sound in this area a little longer. Choi found himself another opponent who, breathing deeply, held the sword with both hands and said that they were ordered to take the life of the traitor. After that, the enemy began to run, swinging his weapon, and the guy realized that the enemy was quite strong and 1 sword strike and he would die in the same second. However, after repelling several attacks, the young man realized that this opponent can learn about all the movements earlier, so this is his weakness. And it turns out that these evil heroes have nothing because they just swing their sword from side to side, and that's it. Therefore, with a little speed and skill, Choi managed to destroy this guy in order to quickly end this matter. After everything was done, the guy began to feel bad because he used the technique for too long and now it was hurting him. Then the young man fell to the ground and holding the leaf, he read in the notification from the system that he had temporarily synchronized his body with dark magic. At this time, the observer, who had been running away from the opponent for quite some time, moved away from him to a safe distance and began to think that he himself was on the verge. And it became clear that the demonic animal was about to break out of the flower, so he had to deal with the attackers before then. When Andrew saw that his opponent was tired, he said with a sarcastic smile that they were heroes who became stronger with each demon they destroyed. Therefore, the young man came to the conclusion that he could first destroy the demon monster hiding in the flower in order to reach the 1000th level. And so he began to accelerate, then pushed off the ground hard and jumped high, jumping on the creature and putting his sword to it. Seeing this, the observer let go of the rope that he had been scattering all over the flower monster, thinking that he was running away from the enemy for a reason. A few hours before this moment, Choi demonstrated 2 fingers on his hand and said that he wanted to explain Plan B in case Plan A did not work. Before telling him anything, the guy smiled broadly and said that the name of this plan was Stealing the Last Stroke. The interlocutor did not understand anything from this name, so he asked for an explanation and the young man said that he would deal with the 6s before the demonic beast was destroyed. After a short pause, Choi added that his partner would have to distract the hero for a while longer, and when the time came, he would help destroy the monster. The blonde man put his hand behind his head and replied that they had no other option for salvation, so he would follow everything, but he found 2 flaws in the plan. Then, The interlocutor raised his index finger up and voiced the first flaw, and it was whether Choi would be able to do everything in time. After that, the observer raised another finger and said that the boy would definitely be able to defeat the monster after he raised his levels several times. After listening carefully, the young man replied in a serious tone that the chance that everything would go as they had planned was less than 1%. Then Choi added that if they gave up now, they would not even have this percentage, and if they had to choose between 0 and 1, he would bet on the latter. At that very moment, the observer began to use the chain he had been carrying with him during the escape, and now he began to tie the enemy with it. The detainee, being in the same position, asked what it would bring to his opponent, because it was just a cheap trick. The blonde demon looked at the enemy and replied that he would see everything for himself, because they also had their own hero who could level up. And immediately after these words, they were joined by the same hero named Choi, who first thanked the blonde commander for doing his part. After that, the slightly modified guy turned to the enemy and pointed at him with his index finger and said that now was the time to deal with it. Andrew waved his sword from side to side and did not intend to give up, so he asked if the young man really thought he could defeat him by simply destroying the monster. Without waiting for an answer, the enemy began to run to attack the opponent, and in a few minutes he realized that Choi was a melee warrior and should not be allowed to get close. Then there was a small clash between them, after which the red-haired Andrew saw that his opponent was able to use advanced fencing of the 7th form. And that's what he couldn't resist, so he missed the attack and flew back a few meters and hit a stone wall and stayed there for a couple of seconds. Being trapped and unable to get out of it, the enemy looked at Choi and began to think about what this guy was and assumed that he was a real demon. At this time, the young man had already approached Andrew and kicked him with just one foot, saying that up to this point, everyone he had fought had been stronger than him. Then the young man noticed that his opponent was losing his balance and approached him even closer and struck him with his hand in order to better see the suffering. When the red-haired man fell to the ground, Choi emphasized that he had only recently realized that the levels of heroes are just a number that can be ignored. And after all the blows he had dealt, he stood in a confident pose with his shoulders straightened and watched Andrew writhing on the ground in pain. About an hour passed from the moment of the incident, and Choi, sitting on the grass, closed his eyes with his hands and said to the interlocutor that he was going to die right now. The observer poured a pink drink on the guy and asked him to drink it, saying that Rachel had brought the medicine here a few minutes ago. The girl hugged the jar with tears in her eyes and said that it was a high-quality healing potion and offered the young man to drink it again. Choi asked where the young lady had gotten the potion, and she told him that she had taken it from the heroes who had died because they had lost it all after their end. Suddenly, the boy began to say that this world is completely incomprehensible because heroes should fight on the side of good and not create their own evil groups. The observer, who was listening to all this, folded his arms across his chest and said that the young man had drawn all these conclusions from his own observations because in his eyes he was a good hero. Then the interlocutor emphasized that Choi should not cling so much to human morality because there are two sides to everything, right and wrong, and it means nothing at all. After hearing all these words, the guy looked at the blonde commander's face and asked him if he was really trying to support him. The demon kicked the young man and told him to shut up and just rest, and during this kick he inflicted a lot of pain on the young man's broken bones. Finally, he added that he had managed to call for help before the connection was lost, so they would be coming for them soon, and they just had to wait for that moment. After waiting for several hours, Choi and the observer returned to the 3rd Corps of the Demon King's army in the Black Palace. However, as soon as they looked around, the boy's mood changed dramatically. He opened his mouth wide and began to shout loudly, asking why their house was on fire. Then they noticed that Hemis attacked the red-haired girl and tried to beat her into confessing that she had been ratting them out all the time she was here. As soon as the girl tried to say something in her defense, the attacker did not want to hear anything, explaining that she was not in the mood today. The red-haired girl had no choice but to try to repel the attacks that were flying in her direction because she was alone and no one could help her. Suddenly, the commander of the 5th Corps, Osgus, appeared through the fog and came here to inform Hemis that the Demon King asked her to stop. The woman could not understand how the king had heard these rumors so quickly, because even if someone could have said something, it did not happen so quickly. Therefore, she was very interested in the question of how the Demon King could find out so quickly and send his messenger here to convey the message. And because of this, Hemis assumed that this young lady was just a decoy, and that there was actually not just one traitor in their area, but several working in turn. After hearing all these words, The envoy of Osgus said that there was no need to guess about anything in vain, because it was just a waste of time without getting any result. The furious woman pushed off the ground and jumped closer to the interlocutor and said that she really had overdone it once in her life when she had served 100 years in the palace for her salvation without the possibility of leaving. After making a short pause, Hemis clarified whether it was overkill that she had once saved Rotok, and all those present did not answer this question. Then the lady still wanted to hear something from the messenger, so she began to put pressure on him, and at that moment, Redrun interrupted the conversation and asked the lady to stop. And Hemis, passing by her so-called enemy, calmly put her hand on his shoulder and said that she had already done everything she wanted to do. After everything was over, Choi woke up in his bed saying that something strange was happening around him because even the army of the Demon King was in a complete mess. At this time, a saint was next to him and asked if he really wanted to stay in the army of the Demon King because she had heard rumors that he was now a battalion commander. The young man stood up and gave an honest answer, saying that he was no longer sure of his plans, but the only thing he knew for sure was that he and Gatrin were now the worst enemy. Then the young man sat down on the edge of the bed and emphasized that now it would be difficult for him to get along with people because he had horns growing out of his head and used dark magic. The woman just laughed, and Choi, not paying attention, remembered something and said that there was definitely something wrong with the characters he had recently met. It seemed to him as if they were all under hypnosis, and even when he destroyed them, not a single muscle moved on their faces. After his story, the guy asked if the girl knew anything about it, and she said that she didn't know much because she hadn't been there for a long time and didn't know how things were going. However, she could tell him that there were many strong heroes in the Sacred Empire and that most of the wars against demons were led by heroes of sacred rank. Then the young lady began to say that she did not know how heroes become so strong because this information is kept secret, and just at that moment the door opened and Redrun appeared through it. The coach told him that they had to go to Hemis together, and as soon as they did, the commander told them that they had to establish a special magic circle. The guy did not really understand what it was, and the girl explained that it was a kind of barrier that would block unregistered movements throughout the Black Palace. However, Hemis went on to say that only the Second Corps could install such fields, and that is why an important decision was made. Namely, Choi will be joined by the Saints, and it will be their working trip. One of them will act as an envoy, and the other will be the envoy's personal physician. Seeing the confusion in the eyes of the guests, the young lady said that she would consider this act as their payment for protecting them both from bloodthirsty people. On top of that, the commander decided to send a guide with the task force, who turned out to be a blonde observer with whom Choi had already worked. At this time, Osgiz, sitting in a meeting in the Great Hall, said that Rhoda was absent again today, and that it was a matter of concern why he was not showing up. Toritug said that this was not a mandatory meeting, so he did not care if someone was absent, but still this disrespect annoyed him in a way. Henna leaned her head back in her chair and said that nothing would change even if their colleague came here, so she advised them to just forget it and continue the discussion. That's why the Demon King decided to continue the meeting and said in a serious tone that today he wanted to talk about the actions of the commander of the Third Corps. Hemis decided to hold a large-scale event without warning, and that is why people took advantage of this moment and attacked the palace, which led to destruction and losses in the army. As soon as the chief said everything, Osgus decided to report the exact numbers and said 97 demons were killed, more than 100 were seriously wounded, and the rest were lightly wounded. After that, the king went on to say that Ms. Hemis had attacked the commander of the Fourth Corps, Hena, without any warning and tried to destroy her. And it was because of these events that the commander violated the rule that a battle between commanders must be discussed in advance and authorized. And finally, the commander said that in accordance with this, today they are discussing the issue of disciplinary measures against Hemis. And when all those present were given the opportunity to speak, Hemis herself said that someone had leaked information to people, and this led to the attack on her palace. She went on to explain that she attacked the red-haired woman because she mistakenly thought she was the rat, so she further advised them to look for the traitor and not to accuse her. The Demon King took these words as a challenge, but the girl did not confirm these guesses, only smiled slightly and said that finding the traitor should be a priority now. After that, everyone else present was asked to go out into the corridor so that the two people could discuss all their emotions in private. The red-haired woman was nervous about everything that was happening around her, so she asked her colleagues if there was any chance that the two would come to a common decision. One of the colleagues replied that, in his opinion, the king and the captain would not come to anything in common, and that the worst situation could unfold when the two allies stand opposite each other. At this time, Choi, along with the saint and the guide, came to the right place and stopped at the magic tower and began to look at it because it was very large and beautiful. Coming a little closer, right in front of the entrance, the group met with a guard who did not let everyone into the tower. In this place, these guards looked like large mice holding weapons in their paws, and blocking the passage began to demand visitors to identify themselves. Passing the message, the guy said his name, and then added that he came from the third building, and the guards heard that their commander was already waiting for them. At this time, the main mouse was lying on his chair and thinking that now a person who uses dark magic quite successfully will come to him. At that very moment, the door to the office opened and 3 visitors entered, immediately raising their hands to their heads and greeting the commander of the Second Corps. The blonde mouse abruptly jumped up from his seat and began to run quickly to Choi, while the others froze in their seats because they did not know what to expect. Then the commander touched the young man's arm and, using his power, warned him that he would feel a sharp pain, so all he had to do was just be patient. The young man even knelt down from the pain, and in order not to scream, he gritted his teeth and lowered his head down, which scared the saint, and she asked him if he was okay. Choi could not answer, but the commander expressed his opinion, saying that he was very surprised by what he saw because there was an incredible evolution of man. After a short pause, the animal looked at the guy and asked him a rather serious question about whether he knew that at this rate he would die in 3 months. The commander went on to explain that the guy's body was rapidly becoming demonic and that he had been very lucky so far because the changes had not affected his vital function. But soon the dark energy would affect his organs, and the first to suffer would be his kidneys and liver, which would immediately show the result of poor health. Then the animal raised its tone and said that when it came to the heart and lungs, Choi would die very simply from the inability to breathe in and out. And the guy listened carefully and asked if the person was lying to him because he was feeling just fine and had no signs of illness. The creature decided to prove his words, so, approaching the table, he took a piece of paper and, demonstrating it, emphasized that it was a demonic oath that did not allow him to lie. After reading all the terms of this oath, the saint was shocked by them and said that the young man should not sign anything because she was ready to take care of him. The commander said that the dark and divine energy reject each other, and nothing has happened so far because Choi is still human. And finally, he summarized that if nothing changes, the holy power will soon become useless, and therefore will not be able to treat this person from what will happen to him. Again, after a short pause, the commander showed the consent form and emphasized that the young man had to choose because he had only 3 months left. Choi was unable to give an answer so quickly, so he was allowed to stay in the men's dormitory for a while to think about his decision. An observer saw that he could not find the right decision for himself and suggested that he call Ms. Hemus for advice. The boy did not really want to talk to the commander because she could advise him what his soul did not want, so at first he hesitated even with this decision. A few hours later, he and the guide came back to the commander, who looked like a mouse, to announce what they had decided. But as it turned out, they hadn't come to anything yet, so they brought a purple ball with them and placed it on the commander's desk right in front of him. The blonde observer, using force, said that he would now engage Ms. Hemus in a conversation, but the commander at that time was carefully examining the balloon. And just a few minutes later, a woman's voice was heard throughout the room, first introducing herself as Hemus and then addressing the commander and asking how he was doing. The animal listened carefully and did not answer the question, but simply said that they had not seen each other in person for a long time, and then emphasized that it seemed to be at the last meeting. After a short pause, the demon in the form of a mouse asked a question in order to understand what exactly made the young lady contact him at such a time. The interlocutor smiled and said that she had one small request, so the gentleman had to write down everything word for word on a sheet of oath. And after that, she began to say that the mouse should treat Choi. While he has no right to harm him in any way, he cannot change the young man's body without his consent. And finally, the commander cannot allow the boy to die before the end of the contract. After listening to these conditions, the interlocutor simply exploded with emotion. He began to shout loudly, clarifying why he should treat a person as a high-ranking demon. Hemus calmly addressed the mouse by name and reminded him that 200 years ago she had helped him when the clan threw him out. The girl did not stop and continued to remind him that 100 years ago she had saved him from angry people, and for that the Demon King had imprisoned her in a black palace because of this help. Then the lady paused for a moment, and then emphasized in a more serious tone that if the interlocutor understood everything, he should sign their contract. The mouse commander had no choice but to sign everything quickly, although he did so not of his own free will, but because he was simply forced to. After everyone left his office, he took out all his anger and irritation to think about his plan of action for the next few days. The next morning, Choi came to the commander, who calmly invited him to his office and said that they had a lot to discuss first. The young man was surprised that the commander did not say a word about the terms of the oath, but instead asked him if he knew why the dark mana was changing his body. The young man quickly raised his right hand up and answered that the use of such magic by humans is just some kind of miracle, and the mouse immediately said that this was not the right answer. But a minute later, he added that people really cannot cope with the mana of demons, and an ordinary person would have already broken down as soon as this power got inside. However, due to certain circumstances and fate, dark magic seems to have taken root and become a part of Choi, and that is why he was able to live to this day. The commander went on to say that this is why the guy's body is changing, and it is changing his whole being into something suitable so that the demonic energy can continue to remain inside. After listening to everything, the young man asked if these changes could be reversed in any way, and the interlocutor quickly gave a clear answer that nothing could be done about the transformation. This upset the young man, and then the commander added that there is a possibility that he can change the direction in which these changes will take place for his betterment. And then the mouse said in a calm tone that he was planning to transplant a part of a demon's or magical beast's body into Choi to balance everything. The boy asked what would happen if he didn't want to do it, and the interlocutor replied that in that case, he would live as long as his body could cope with the dark mana, and then he would simply die. Without waiting for any answer from the young man, the creature said that he should not worry so much because his appearance and organs would remain the same, and they would transplant something that would be hardly noticeable. After that, they moved to the training arena where the young man would demonstrate to the commander how he uses his skill called nobility. As soon as Choi used this technique, the interlocutor noticed in a matter of seconds that he was creating a large amount of energy using the collision of dark and human magic. And in addition, he had enough physical strength and spirit to withstand this, so the commander defined it as a real talent that was given by heaven. Next, the demon asked to apply the promotion, and as soon as the guy did it, the mentor noticed that the main change in appearance during this process was horn. Seeing it all with his own eyes, the commander had a great desire to study it all and repeat it, so he thought that if it wasn't for Hamis's promise, he would have dismembered Choi right there on the spot. Then the commander plunged into his thoughts and made a plan on how he could use all this to his advantage, but at that moment, a young man approached him to find out what he should do next. The interlocutor said with a sweet smile that they could finish for today, and informed that tomorrow he would start treating the body and improving the ward's abilities step by step. Several days have passed since the first meeting, during which Choi had to go through severe pain all over his body and the tests that Commander Mouse prepared for him. There were days when he felt very bad, but there were also days when he was completely elated and just seemed to be flying around the office and the training arena. On one of the days, the young man fell face down on the floor and said that he was going to die, and his mentor emphasized that this would not happen because his body and energy had become more stable. Therefore, the commander said that the young man could be free for today, and as soon as he went out into the corridor and closed the door behind him, the mouse approached the purple ball. And sitting in its chair, the animal turned to the interlocutor on the other side to find out the answer to the previous request. It turns out that the commander this time contacted a red-haired young lady who, smiling slyly, asked if he wanted to join her in order to destroy the third building. Not allowing him to answer, the girl began to cite a bunch of facts that the demon in the form of a mouse might disagree with, but he emphasized that his path and Hamis's path had long diverged. And all because at the right time, the young lady simply did not support him and did not believe in him when he wanted to create a study of chimeras. It was during that meeting that Hamis spoke very harshly about his personality, calling him weak and unable to adequately lead a group of his chimeras. Having scrolled through this unpleasant memory in his head, the demon mouse again turned to the red-haired girl in order to get an answer to whether she was in business or not. The girl was in no hurry to give an answer. Then the creature explained that now in his hands is an interesting specimen, and if he can repeat his abilities, it will be possible to reach incredible height. Then the demon mouse said that now this guy's talent can destroy Hamis herself, so they can unite to get rid of her together. The young lady decided to agree after hearing all that, because he would definitely not be able to cope on his own, and finally asked to be notified when there was a specific plan. The commander said that he would contact the redhead in a few days, and it turned out that Rachel heard the whole conversation, who was sitting in the office eating cookies. After that, she told her everything, and Choi and the guide contacted Hamis to inform her so that she would know everything. The girl smiling on the other side of the phone said that she had guessed about it and that it was not news to her that could surprise her. And so the commander clarified that this was the only reason they contacted her, and Choi scratched his head and said that it was not the only reason. And then he asked what he should do, because he was like a shrimp stuck between two killer whales who were fighting over it. The interlocutor did not hesitate to answer, saying that she had a good idea that would put the mouse commander in an awkward position and make him change his mind. And the next day, in front of the demon's laboratory, Choi grabbed one of the guards to knock him out in order to continue to move freely. As soon as he succeeded, the guide turned to the young man and told him to follow him because he had found the door they were looking for. Once inside, they found the poisonous substance, and the blonde colleague said that he was ready to spend money on Choi's funeral if something went wrong. The guy said that these words touched his soul, and after that he picked up the jar and said that he was ready to drink its contents, which he did. And it all started when the young man simply asked what he should do in this situation, and Hemis told him that he should injure himself. When the young man heard this, he was simply shocked, and the interlocutor, of course, felt that he was confused and emphasized that she was serious. After that, the commander explained how the demon would try to harm Choi, but he still could not understand what would change after he injured himself. The interlocutor did not answer the question. Instead, she said that the mouse had been collecting various liquids containing dark mana all his life. Therefore, the young man must find the room where they are located and consume one of them. But this scared the young man, and he confusedly asked whether these actions would not destroy him. Hemis said in a calm tone that according to the contract, the demon could not allow Choi to die in his arms, so he would save him. Hearing the silence in response, she said that the boy should trust her because she knows this demon well, and he is a great doctor who has received her recognition. That's why the young man had already drunk the contents of one of the bottles, and a guide and a fairy stood next to him to watch what was going to happen. From the very beginning, Choi said that he felt fine, but in just a few minutes his condition deteriorated dramatically, and everyone realized that it was just beginning. Writhing and spitting blood, the guy said that they could have warned him beforehand that he would experience such severe pain. The observer came closer and pretended that he had forgotten to say this because he realized that if he had said it earlier, the young man might not have agreed. A few hours later, the young man woke up in bed in an unfamiliar room, so he got up and looked around to see where he was. Rachel, who was nearby, told him that the young man was in the office of the commander of the 2nd Corps and that he had been personally taking care of the victim for 4 days. Hearing this news, Choi laughed out loud, and the girl asked him a question to find out how his subordinate was feeling now. The guy did not have time to give any specific answer because Hemis appeared in the room and greeted him with a big smile and wished him a speedy recovery. She went on to say that Commander Misha had told her that the young man was feeling much better, so she decided to come and visit him. After that, she came closer to the boy and looked him in the eye and emphasized that he had become strong, and she could not even imagine that this could be such a result. Choi couldn't understand why she was saying that because he didn't feel stronger, but suddenly he felt a sharp pain because the girl put her hand on his shoulder. Then, over Hemis's shoulder, he saw the mouse commander, who said in a serious tone that the dark mana of the ancient demonic beast had intensified inside the young man. After a short pause, the creature added that this demonic animal had a special feature of an invulnerable body, and now the new hero Choi has this ability. Hemis heard this and said that she was a little jealous and asked why the commander was hiding such a useful and interesting ability from her. The interlocutor did not answer. Instead, he emphasized that he had completed the treatment of the person and asked if he could already destroy the oath. The girl touched the sheet with her finger and set it on fire, saying that it could indeed be destroyed because their agreement was only about treatment. The demon in the form of a mouse said that the young lady would regret what she had done. Hemis just smiled and said that she did not know what he had planned, but she was not sure that she would regret it. And they all went back to the Dark Palace, where Choi had been training at the Reborn training ground for a few days to improve his skills. After a few minutes of the fight, the guy managed to land several strong blows to his opponent, and this made him happy, which resulted in a smile. And while he was rejoicing, Reborn was able to hit him so that he just fell to the ground, and said that everyone says that he has increased strength, but he is still not on the same level as the demon. The giant came closer and said that the boy should not be upset even if he did not see the results, because he was still developing the fastest of all who had trained here. Then the coach smiled broadly, put his hands at his sides, and said that the young man's body was not yet accustomed to the strength it was endowed with, so very soon everything would be a little better. Rising to his feet, Choi said sadly that he did not think it would ever get better, because even during the last battle he needed help. Reborn gave him his hand and said that he should be patient, because one day the time will come when he will be able to prove himself. These words certainly comforted and reassured the boy, and even gave him hope and inspiration to continue working to prove himself a strong hero. At this time, the demon in the form of a mouse organized the gathering of his army to implement his plan because he did not want to put it off for a long time. The goal of this commander was to resume experiments on people and return the Dark Palace that Hemis had stolen from them a long time ago and did not want to return. Mouse was so angry at what happened to her that she was ready to destroy everyone in her path in order to organize a good future for herself. While Reborn and Choi were on the training ground, a massive explosion occurred near them, and the goblins reported that they were attacked by the second corps. These attackers look like mice. Their average height is about half a meter, and they don't have much strength due to their size, but they are very smart. Along with the leader of these attackers was a red-haired girl who agreed to this whole adventure and therefore had to help lead the army. While they were talking to each other, one of their subordinates said that they had managed to destroy one of the walls, and it turned out that the local demons had not managed to fully restore it. After that, the commander of the mouse said that he could launch all the chimeras inside and tell the main one that he had to catch an arrogant experimental man. And finally, the leader added that he and the redhead would go to Commander Hemis to deal with her once and for all. While all these orders were being given out, Redrun and Choi were already running through the corridors of the palace, discussing the fact that they still had a hunch that this demon in the form of a mouse could attack. The giant was running ahead, and the boy was behind, and he loudly asked the coach what he was going to do in this case, and what he should do. The interlocutor stopped abruptly and turned his head to the boy, and replied that he would regroup the army to spread them around the perimeter. And Choi has to go and deal with the Chimera commander because now there will be chaos in the palace, and no one will be able to deal with him, and he can also do a lot of damage. Of course, the boy was a little confused and did not know what to do or where to run, so Redrun said that he believed that the student would succeed because he had been training hard. And after these instructions, the young man seemed to blossom in his mind and began to make various plans for how he could act during the battle with his opponent. So he said that he would try to do everything in the best way possible. After splitting up, Redrun went to fulfill his task, and Choi first ran to the saint's room and grabbed her hand and told her that she would go with him. Then he said that when he walked around the territory with her, he would definitely attract the attention of the person he was looking for because the young lady spreads the power of the saint around. And just a few minutes later, the same commander of the chimeras appeared behind him, and Choi realized that he was much stronger than he thought. A little deeper in his thoughts, the guy assumed that this opponent was somewhere on the same level as the red-headed enemy, so he wondered if he would be able to win. However, he did not come to a final answer because he was attacked by a pair of red dogs and had to fight them off instead of thinking. Watching this, the commander of the chimeras was smiling sarcastically and loudly, saying that he would grab this impudent person in a few minutes. That's why the attacker was glad that he did not go into battle first and used 2 of his subordinate dogs to do all the work for him. However, when the enemy got accustomed to what was happening in front of him, he noticed that his subordinates were now losing because they could not hurt this young man. During this time, Choi had already managed to change his appearance in order to use dark magic and began to run towards his enemy. When the commander of the chimeras saw this, he began to loudly call everyone to him because he could not lose so easily to some ordinary person. After this call, a saint came out of the corner of her eye and addressed the young man, saying that a group of chimeras were now heading to them and that there might be another one later. Therefore, in order to help Choi somehow, the young lady knelt down, folded her hands as if in prayer, and began to say a prayer quietly. After staying in this state for a while, the saint said that it would not last long because she was releasing sacred power and it made her body get tired quickly. The guy emphasized that the girl had helped him a lot, so he could finish spending his power because then he would be able to attack the enemy on his own. And during this time, he managed to get very close to the commander of the chimeras, and this allowed him to strike the enemy directly and closely. Then the guy stopped and put his hands to his sides and looked at the chimera commander who was lying on the floor and said that he was a very weak enemy. Suddenly, another realization came to the boy, and he thought with a frightened expression that this was the moment where he could see his strength. The saint was frightened by this reaction and excitedly asked the young man if he was okay, and he walked towards her with slow steps and said that everything was fine. At this time, the commander of the 3rd Corps, Hemis, was already on his way to the commander of the 3rd Corps, Commander Mouse, and the red-haired woman in order to get rid of the rival together. Watching the approach, the young lady smiled slyly and emphasized that the demon in the form of a mouse was like a coward because he took help with him. The enemy stopped and said that the girl could call it whatever she wanted, but right now they would do their best to destroy her. But before starting the attack, the creature turned to his red-haired partner and asked if she was really ready to make Hemis's life fun together. After a short pause, the girl first smiled mysteriously and then apologized, saying that she was suddenly hungry. Then she suggested that they both have fun and she would go home to eat because she could not function normally when she was hungry. The red-haired woman made this decision because a few days before she and Hemis had agreed on everything, and the girl reminded her that the commander of the 3rd Corps was now her debtor. And after that, the young lady left the battlefield and Hemis folded his arms across his chest and mockingly said that the demon mouse's best ally had just turned his back on him. Then the young lady said that the red-haired woman had changed sides when she learned about the plan of attack, and now she knew in detail what was going to happen. After a short pause, the woman looked into the eyes of her enemy and asked in a serious tone whether he still wanted to continue his plan. The demon in the form of a mouse realized that he simply had no chance to retreat, so he said that he was ready to demonstrate that much had changed over the past 100 years. At this time, the red-haired woman appeared in front of Choi and the saint, and at first they were frightened by this appearance because they did not know who would appear before them now. The girl, seeing the couple, smiled sweetly and said that she decided to visit them to see if they had fallen under the hand. Then the young lady, having assessed the appearance of the young man, said that she should not worry about anything further because she saw with her own eyes that he had become stronger. The interlocutor asked why the red-haired woman came here when the fight was going on upstairs, and she replied that Hemis asked her to stand aside, so she is here now. Having received this explanation, Choi came a little closer to the lady and asked her, with a happy smile, who she would bet on in this fight. The lady scratched her chin and began to think out loud that the demon in the form of a mouse was well prepared, but that Hemis was also a worthy opponent. While the red-haired woman was thinking about her bet, the commander of the Third Corps immediately began to use her best techniques. The attacker was a little confused at first, but he didn't want to show it to the girl, so he raised his weapon up and emphasized that he was serious about this battle. Hemis said that she didn't care about it, and preparing for the attack, she emphasized that she would win anyway, so he didn't have to worry about it. Then she began to press the fact that the demon's ally had left before the battle began, and the weapons he had been making for 100 years were useless. That's why the commander of the Third Corps asked if he was sure that he wanted to continue, and the enemy agreed with everything she said, but he didn't want to retreat today. And using his new technique, he began to look at the girl, saying that even she would not be able to resist him and offered her to surrender. After this attack, Hemis emphasized that her opponent had really changed a lot, and he was not the same as she knew him, and it turns out he was not lying about the fact that he had grown a lot. Then the young lady licked her index finger and looked up and down the commander and said that it was her turn to attack. And in just a few minutes, something happened that knocked off the enemy's armor and made him float in the air because he lost his balance. Being in a not very good condition, the demon mouse wanted to clarify with the interlocutor whether he was still weak, useless, and miserable in her eyes. After that, the victim's eyes began to flash back to memories from the past, where he had a great desire to become as strong as Ms. Hemis. Then he dreamed of becoming a demon that no one could defeat, and he worked for so many years to realize this dream. And then, during a personal meeting with Hemis, he heard from her not words of support, but rather condemnation, that he was a bad leader for his chimeras because he was too weak. It was at this moment that there was a small awkward pause on the battlefield because each of the participants plunged into their own thoughts that filled their heads. But Hemis was the first to come to her senses, saying that it was time to end it all and explaining that at first it may seem that some relationships can last forever, but over time, people do not live up to expectations because of their questionable choices. And putting her hand on her opponent's face, she emphasized that he had brightened some moments of her life, but now he could rest in peace.